Chapter 15:12. Was this damned little white flower going to pester her for the rest of her life? However, she remembered that this guy had a short life and was in someone else's territory. Wei Wei Bai could only accept her fate and stay with him. Gu Nanli heaved a sigh of relief. She was really staying. In the future, he would have to pretend to be weak and faint from time to time. This trick was too useful. Wei Wei Bai did not know that the man in front of her, who made a big boss tremble, was thinking of how to pretend to be weak to keep her. Her mind was filled with the last Mary Sue novel. She was only halfway through. She was scratching her lungs dry. She had to continue reading. How could she not see the ending? As for Gu Nanli, forget it. He had a short life anyway. She would be free after a few more years. After all, it was tiring to move around everywhere. Moreover, when Gu Nanli was chasing people, he would set up an inescapable net everywhere. She had already completed the strategy. She did not want to use her brain. She just wanted to eat and wait for death. Wei Wei Bai accompanied Gu Nanli while reading a novel. Then she asked the system worriedly, "He really has a short life?" The system said, "Very short, 80 years was indeed a short life." For the system, it was a unit of calculation of 10,000 years. Was it short or not? Wei Wei Bai was relieved. She touched Gu Nanli's hair and said gently, "Sleep. I'll stay with you. I won't go anywhere." Gu Nanli had been tormented to death, but he only wanted to hear this sentence. He hugged her and rested his head on her chest as he softly hummed in agreement. Then he slowly closed his eyes. His broken soul seemed to be gathering again. Those dark and painful dreams were replaced by happiness. Gu Nanli slept for a long time. He seemed to have another dream. It was a perfect dream. She stayed by his side for a lifetime. She never left and accompanied him to the grave. This dream made his eyes wet. It was not tears that he pretended to be pitiful to get Wei Wei Bai. Instead, it was a feeling born from countless sufferings and heart-wrenching pain. He had her. After a lifetime, she finally decided not to leave. After waking up, he didn't even know what kind of dream he had, but the feeling from the dream was still there. The sun had already shone in. He turned his head and saw her obediently huddled in his arms, breathing steadily. Gu Nanli gently stroked her long hair and planted a kiss on the top of her head. He suddenly felt that he had endured such a difficult and dark hellish torture. It was just for this moment in life. The follow-up to Mr. Gu's Willful Miss, 3 years later. In the conference room, Gu Nanli lowered his head and flipped through the documents. He wore a black suit and rimless glasses, looking like a refined beast. After carefully reading the document for a while, he took off his glasses and tapped his fingers on the table. "I don't think this proposal is suitable for financing." On the other side of the table, Wei Wei Bai sat lazily. She rested her chin on her hand and raised an eyebrow at him. "How is it inappropriate?" Gu Nanli's gaze stopped at her delicate, fair, and perfect legs under her skirt. He stopped tapping the table and his gaze deepened. "You know, my company is just a small company that has just been established. It's a little difficult to invest in another company." "As if I'd believe you." Although Gu Nanli spent 2 years in the industry, he had painstakingly changed his business and successfully cleared his name. But in this year, who didn't know that he had become the leader of the industry? Gu Nanli's foundation was so good that it was frightening. If it weren't for the fear of causing unnecessary trouble, he could immediately soar to the sky after clearing his name. Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 15:13. You can search Transmigration System, Adonis, come over to search book, www. Sashu. Calm, on Baidu to find the. Even though the company had kept a low profile, the speed at which it was expanding was still shocking. Wei Bai had also started her own business and started a company to enter the internet industry. As she needed investors, she came to look for Gu Nanli. Gu Nanli touched the contract with his fingers and pursed his thin lips. His eyes were unusually deep. Of course, if you can work a little harder, I might just agree to it. Wei Bai sat in front of the table and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, she lifted her leg and placed it on the table. Her beautiful calf was only a thin line away from Gu Nanli. Gu Nanli placed his hands on the table and looked at her intently. Wei Bai looked seductive and touched her leg gently. Her voice was low and sexy. How do you want me to work, Mr. Gu? Gu Nanli's Adam's apple bobbed, but his expression was still cold. Wei Bai placed her finger gently in front of her lips. It was natural and charming. If you don't tell me, how will I know what you want me to do? Gu Nanli's eyes were burning. His hand touched her leg slowly and his expression became dangerous. You know what to do, Miss Bai. He had stopped being a mafia boss and had become a gentleman. Wei Bai looked at him with disdain and suddenly pulled her leg back. She tugged at her skirt and rolled her eyes before standing up. Be careful, I'll sue you for sexual harassment in your company. If you don't want to invest, then forget it. I can find a lot of men to invest in. After saying this, Bai Wei flirtatiously brushed back her hair that had grown for several years, and mercilessly walked out. Gu Nanli's hand stopped in mid-air. He wanted to pull her back, but he remembered that they were in the office. If he acted like a beast here, she would probably be angry. Gu Nanli took the pen helplessly. Seriously, you're getting more and more willful. You're not even willing to coax me. He signed the investment contract and snorted coldly. Do you believe that any man who dares to look at you outside will be hospitalized? Just as she finished signing, Wei Bai suddenly returned and locked the door. Gu Nanli didn't even have time to react. Wei Bai directly sat on the table, clasped his head, and kissed him fiercely. After she finished kissing him, she said in disdain, those old Wangs next door are all uglier than you. Forget it, you're still more pleasing to the eye. After the unspoken rules, you'll sign an investment. Gu Nanli immediately crumpled up the signed contract and threw it into the trash can. Then he smiled and said, yes, my dear wife. 7 years later. Wei Bai asked doubtfully, Tongzi, why is that damn fox Gu Nanli's body getting better and better? I'm clearly always dragging him to do things with weak kidneys. The system felt guilty. It hugged the hamburger it got from selling the furniture and said, strong on the outside but weak on the inside. It can suddenly die at any time. Don't worry. Wei Bai nodded in understanding. I guessed it would be soon. After all, it's been 7 years. Suddenly, she felt the hand of the man behind her clasping her waist again. His face, which had become more mature and handsome in recent years, had a trace of intense redness. You're awake. It's still early. Sleep a little more. Wei Bai stared blankly at his face for a while. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, it's been 7 years. Don't you feel itchy? Everyone said that it was the 7-year itch, but this bastard didn't like anyone all these years. He came and went with a zombie face. Even Cici occasionally came from his own family to look for him with great fanfare. He had an incomparably calm look on his face. Friendship didn't matter, family didn't matter, love was only her. Wasn't this kind of life boring? Wasn't it boring? Is at https://www.sashu.com// Chapter 15-14 Gu Nonli's eyes narrowed dangerously. Itchy. Why are you asking this question? Was she starting to dislike him? After being married for so many years, no matter how loving a couple was, there would always be one party who wanted to seek novelty. Could it be that Wei Wei Bai wanted novelty too? Wei Wei Bai saw his expression and felt that she had said something wrong. She laughed it off. Nothing, I just suddenly felt itchy, so I'm scratching. Gu Nonli held her hand and slowly tickled her with his fingers. I'll tickle you. His voice was extremely magnetic, if only it was not so eerie. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened and her breathing became irregular. Where are you tickling? Gu Nonli said slowly, everywhere. If you dare to tickle, I'll tickle you from head to toe. Wei Wei Bai burst out laughing. This bastard was specifically tickling her the most ticklish place. Gu Nonli held her down and tickled her with familiarity. Are there any other places that are ticklish? I'll help you. Wei Wei Bai was so ticklish that her whole body trembled. She shivered and said with a smile, no, I'm not ticklish anymore. Gu Nonli kissed her lips carelessly and said vaguely, but I'm ticklish when I see you. Wei Wei Bai suddenly realized that he was not done for yet, but she was going to die prematurely because of him. It had been 7 years, how could he say that she was going to die prematurely? Why was her experience better than before? 20 years later. Wei Wei Bai carried her luggage and sneaked onto the bus. She was leaving. Gu Nonli was still very healthy after 20 years. It seemed that Gu Nonli could live to 100 years old. The system said, don't run, you're already an old couple. Wei Wei Bai sat. You said he's going to die prematurely. How is he going to die prematurely? The system said, it's only been a few years, you're not at the best age yet. Wei Wei Bai, best my ass. I can see the crow's feet at the corner of my eyes. No matter how talented she was and how good she was at maintaining her skin, she was already at the age where skin problems began to appear. Wei Wei Bai said fiercely, no, I can't take it anymore. I'd better find a high place and jump down. The system didn't expect her to be so ruthless. Wasn't the effect of the blocker too good? Wei Wei Bai actually hated Gu Nonli so much. After the system voiced its doubts, Wei Wei Bai took out a lollipop and stuffed it into her mouth. She said vaguely, why would I hate him? He is so obedient to me. He even helped me wash my feet and wash my hair. Where are you going to find such a good and free worker? The system said, don't you hate staying by his side, so much so that you want to die? Wei Wei Bai said, it has nothing to do with him. I just can't stand it, I'm old. The system was speechless. Wei Wei Bai shuddered. If Gu Nonli lives until he's 70 or 80 years old, and I live until I'm 70 or 80 years old too, won't I become an old woman? The system said, wait, you've been worrying about this for half a day. Wei Wei Bai waved the lollipop fiercely. If I'm not beautiful, I'll die. The system was speechless. It was silent. The host was seriously ill and it had no medicine. The driver suddenly said, Madam, we're picking up another guest. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Madam. The bus stopped. The passengers on the bus stood up and nodded at Wei Wei Bai. Hello, madam. Goodbye, madam. The system coughed lightly. It didn't expect that its laziness would cause Wei Wei Bai to get on the bus of a thief. It had been too peaceful these past few years. It and its host were raised like pigs. The download the at https://m sashu. Com save button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 15:15. The car was empty, and a man walked up slowly. He was wearing a long windbreaker, his hair was combed back, and time had left traces of maturity and elegance on his face. He walked over to Wei Wei Bai and sat down beside her. Where are you going? Gu Nanli was not angry at all, and asked gently. Wei Wei Bai looked guilty, and laughed, I just came out for a walk. Gu Nanli looked at her luggage and shook his head, this luggage is not big enough, next time get a bigger one and bring me along. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Gu Nanli looked at the candy in her hand, she had changed a lot for him. He told her not to smoke, and to eat candy if she wanted to smoke, and she always followed his words. He was never willing to ask anything of her, unless it was something that would harm her, otherwise he would indulge her and spoil her. It had become his instinct. Gu Nanli smiled, next time, don't forget to bring me along. Wei Wei Bai sulked for a while, then looked away, and nodded unwillingly. The haunting Mr. Gu was still by Miss Bai's side 24/7. Many years later. Wei Wei Bai said weakly, Tongzi, you're a liar, a liar. The system said, save your energy, we're leaving. Wei Wei Bai tried to remember, where's Gu Nanli? The system said, he's dying too, but slower than you. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She was wearing a ventilator, and her consciousness was a little muddled, but she saw Gu Nanli sitting beside her, wearing a beautiful new suit. Gray hair, wrinkles all over his face, but his body was still as straight as ever. Even if he was old, his charm was still there. If he was dying, how could he sit beside her so energetically? Gu Nanli saw her looking at him, and could not help but sit up straighter. He said softly, you're beautiful, Wei Wei. He knew that she was most afraid of being old and ugly. But he really didn't lie to her. She was really beautiful, from the second he met her. Even now, she was still the most beautiful person in his eyes. After hearing this, Wei Wei Bai nodded in satisfaction and then slowly closed her eyes. Gu Nanli held her hand and suddenly tightened his grip. The grief in his eyes swept over and he finally couldn't help but ask, in our next life, we will still meet and love each other. Her electrocardiogram beeped sharply and became a straight line. She spent the rest of her life with him. Every moment that she was here was bliss. Every day in this world was worth looking forward to. The tears in Gu Nanli's eyes fell. He kissed her hand and said in a hoarse voice, wait for me. I'll find you. After saying that, he collapsed and fell to the ground with a loud crash. A group of nurses and doctors ran over. Mr. Gu. In fact, Gu Nanli was also at the end of his rope, but to reassure Wei Wei Bai, he forced himself to sit beside her. This posture was undoubtedly hastening his own death. Half an hour after Wei Wei Bai died, Gu Nanli also stopped breathing. Everyone knew that they were the most envied couple. Gu Nanli doted on Wei Wei Bai for the rest of her life. Wei Wei Bai accompanied Gu Nanli for the rest of his life. They didn't have any children in their lives, but they lived a much happier life than anyone who lived 3 lifetimes under the same roof. After they died, their old friend Cici helped them preside over the funeral. Their ashes were buried together and shared a tombstone. They were born in the same bed and died in the same cave. This was also Gu Nanli's greatest wish in his life. A man who was strong enough to go further in his career stopped because of a woman. /to-txt. Chapter 15-16. Cici felt that Gu Nanli was living a good life, even though his life revolved around a woman every day. He grieved for her, rejoiced for her, cooked for her, washed her hair, and acted like a dog for her. But he was living more like a human now. He was not a cold ghost who only knew how to walk painfully in the dark. It was worth it to meet Wei Wei Bai. The system carried Wei Wei Bai and tiptoed back to reality. It looked left and right. Yi Yuxuan was not here, right? She must not be here. Yi Yuxuan, that heaven-defying bastard, could just grab it with his hands. What if he grabbed it away from Wei Wei Bai and locked it in a cage one day? Wei Wei Bai and Yi Yuxuan were like comparing a baby to a giant. There was no comparison at all. It could still help Wei Wei Bai steal Yi Yuxuan's luck, so that she could live a good life. But if it was killed by Yi Yuxuan, Wei Wei Bai would probably die, and even Yi Yuxuan would not be able to save her. Because Yi Yuxuan had not awakened at all, she was just doing things based on instinct. The system looked left and right. Hey, Yi Yuxuan was not here. It immediately stuffed Wei Wei Bai's soul back. Wei Wei Bai was still in deep sleep. After her soul returned, she would rest for a period of time and would not wake up immediately. Just as her soul returned to its original position, Yi Yuxuan and Blind, who was wearing small round sunglasses, walked in. Let me tell you, this is a big project. I used up all the money that my ancestors left me to be able to set up this red one-star array for you. Ah, she's heart ached when he said that. Yi Yuxuan said calmly, I'll give you more money. Ah, she's heart immediately stopped aching and he hurriedly said, I see that your face is glowing and your facial features are handsome. I can tell with one look that you are someone with great luck. This time, the activation of the formation will definitely succeed. For the past few days, Yi Yuxuan had been busy with this matter with all Xia. During this time, Qin Qiu also called back. When your father-in-law came back from his trip, he listened to you and went to look for a second love. In the end, he was cheated of his money. He wasn't cheated, but your father-in-law was disheartened. He said that he would never look for a second love again. Yi Yuxuan said coldly, It's fine. I'll just say a few more words of encouragement in the future, and he'll go find her. It would be best to find a powerful old woman as a partner. This way, Bai Changyan would not have time to appear beside Wei Wei Bai. Qin Qiu, by the way, when are you going back to the company? There is a backlog of important work and no one dares to sign it. Yi Yuxuan, you go and sign it. I'll send you a letter of authorization later. You help me sign all the documents. Qin Qiu, how can I do that? Haven't I become the president of the Yi Group? Yi Yuxuan, well, so once there is a loss in the documents you sign, it will all be on your head. Qin Qiu, then forget it, Yi Yuxuan, that's it. I'm still very busy. Don't look for me for this kind of small matter in the future. Qin Qiu, you don't have a job. What are you busy with? Yi Yuxuan was very straightforward, I'm busy with a relationship. A fortune teller said that he could pull a matchmaker for me. Qin Qiu, a fortune teller, pull a matchmaker. What era was this? Why did it feel like they were back in the feudal era? The point was, Yi Yuxuan, this guy who was so calm that he lost his humanity, was actually superstitious. Qin Qiu immediately said, Dude, superstition is not reliable. I'll introduce you to the basic books on picking up girls. I guarantee that Wei Wei will definitely be tempted by you. Hello. Yi Yuxuan hung up. There. Chapter 15-17. Yi Yuxuan had already hung up the phone expressionlessly. She said a lot of things at once. He realized that Yi Yuxuan was not listening at all. He only asked, will it fail? He went straight to the point, no fancy words were useful. Can it be done? Will it fail? It was simple and direct, too lazy to say a word of nonsense. She's eloquent mouth was completely useless. He pinched his fingers and calculated, then suddenly raised his eyebrows. Customer, are you in a better mood? Because he was in a better mood, the light around him became stronger. This kind of light was the light of joy, without a hint of gloom. It was strange. When he first saw him, his light was mixed with chaotic, dark, and strange thoughts. Did anything happen during this period of time? Yi Yuxuan glanced at Wei Wei Bai, who was lying on the recliner and sleeping quietly, and his eyes softened. I had a good dream. In the dream, she did not leave and accompanied him for a lifetime. That kind of deep love and heavy joy intertwined into a kind of humble joy. It was too beautiful. After he woke up, he squatted beside Wei Wei Bai and looked at her for a long time before confirming that she really did not leave this time. Even if he had completely fallen in love with her. She still did not commit suicide, was not murdered, not mistakenly killed, and did not run away. Instead, she stayed with him for a lifetime. His tormented spirit was immediately smoothed out by this lifetime of companionship. Yi Yuxuan found that there was a gentle joy in his feelings. She calculated strangely, but did not calculate Yi Yuxuan's dream. This man's luck was too strong. So strong that his fortune-telling skills could not work on him. If the Red Luan heart formation was to be a matchmaker for a pair of lonely people, it would definitely succeed. But the problem was with Yi Yuxuan. His luck was like the sea and mountains, shocking people. This kind of person was basically a favored child of heaven, and their fate was almost impossible to reverse. Therefore, if they wanted to change anything about him, they would have to pay a huge price. On the other hand, it was easy for Wei Wei Bai to change her fate. This was because her providence was much weaker than that of ordinary people. If it wasn't for the fact that Wei Wei Bai was still alive, every time she saw Wei Wei Bai's body emitting a light that was about to dissipate, he would think that she was actually dead. Actually, it was strange that Wei Wei Bai was still alive. Even though Yi Yuxuan blocked his fortune-telling every time he did it, he still couldn't do it. But still, most of the fates that were divined were death fates. In other words, Wei Wei Bai was a dead person. He didn't dare to say such a thing. After all, if he offended Yi Yuxuan, he wouldn't have any money. Of course, divinations could also be wrong, especially around someone as strong as Yi Yuxuan. Any wrong divinations could go wrong. If he had met such a person in the past, he would definitely have chased him away or left on his own. This was because if a fortune teller was not accurate, their reputation would be tarnished, and no one would come to them. But this time, he would rather make all the wrong divinations. Because Yi Yuxuan was rich, super rich, money, 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 money. After finishing this job, he would be able to retire. She was very attentive to his big boss. The Red Luan's heart formation needs to be activated tonight, when the stars are in the sky. Wait a moment, I'll get someone to bring tea. Yi Yuxuan didn't answer. Instead, he stared at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. It was as if his heart was being tugged at. He seemed to have a premonition that she was about to wake up. Yi Yuxuan asked coldly, "Will this red string trap her soul?" Chapter 15:18. No, but if the soul leaves the body too many times, the red string will become weak and must be reinforced. Yi Yuxuan, then reinforce it. She hesitated. But you know that the array needs a lot of treasures to activate, Yi Yuxuan, I'll pay for it. She immediately smiled so widely that his teeth were exposed. He didn't look reserved at all like a fortune teller. Of course, I promise to reinforce the string into an iron chain. Even diamonds can't cut it. Wei Wei Bai was half awake and seemed to hear someone talking beside her. She struggled to open her eyes and found a young man with only a little hair standing beside her. He was wearing sunglasses and looked like he was blind. And beside the young man was Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan was wearing a casual shirt and seemed to be saying something with his eyes lowered. He suddenly paused and looked over. And the man wearing sunglasses seemed to have sensed something. He turned around with his hands behind his back and said, "Then I'll prepare everything tonight." With that, he left. And Yi Yuxuan stood in the same place, looking at her with a strange expression. Then he walked in front of her and took the thermos flask beside her. It was filled with warm ginseng water with many things that were good for the body. It was specially made for Wei Wei Bai. Yi Yuxuan's slender fingers held the thermos flask and poured a cup for her. Then he lowered his head and supported her body to feed her the water. The warm and sweet drink made Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows relax. Her mind was still in a mess. A lifetime was too long, so long that she would be stunned for a while when she saw Yi Yuxuan's face. Only then did she feel that he was not a stranger. The system had said that it had dealt with her negative emotions and accelerated her memories blurry. So the repercussions of a lifetime were reduced to the minimum. Even at the minimum, she still couldn't immediately adapt to the feeling of returning to reality. She looked at Yi Yuxuan in a daze. His face seemed to be blurred by the backlight, and an inexplicable sense of familiarity appeared in her heart. Yi Yuxuan saw her absent-minded look and whispered, "Let's go on a date tonight." Wei Wei Bai was dumbfounded. She only just came back to her senses and understood what he said. A date? Yi Yuxuan's fingers gently stroked her somewhat messy long hair. Finally, he couldn't help but kiss her. Her familiar scent and the warmth of their bodies made his eyes tear up. He was already able to familiarize himself with the surge of emotions and sort them out in an orderly manner. Joy, jealousy, sadness, love. Wei Wei Bai looked at Yi Yuxuan's strange expression and asked carefully, "Tongzi, what's the situation now?" Yi Yuxuan felt like she had taken the wrong medicine again. He really missed the expressionless robot Yi Yuxuan from the beginning. Now, no matter how he looked at it, it was very strange. The system is hiding in the trash can. Don't talk to me, don't talk to me, don't talk to me, don't see me, don't see me. Wei Wei Bai didn't hear the system's answer. Those strange doubts in her heart finally turned into a confirmed guess. The system didn't dare to speak in front of Yi Yuxuan. Once could be an accident, twice could also be an accident, but 3 or 4 times. Wei Wei Bai began to think about why the system didn't dare to say anything. Could it be that Yi Yuxuan could sense the existence of the system? Wei Wei Bai calmly put away these doubts. She didn't forget how terrifying Yi Yuxuan's ability to observe people was. Yi Yuxuan saw a flash of doubt in her expression, but it quickly disappeared. He pondered for a few seconds and didn't look into her expression. Button now. Chapter 15-19. Because he was in a good mood, this kind of good mood even made him a little excited. Yi Yuxuan said very naturally, "I'll help you shower and wash your hair, then eat something." Wei Wei Bai wanted to pick her ears. What? You're helping me shower and wash my hair? What kind of magic is this? Yi Yuxuan was in Gu Nanli's shoes. After spending a lifetime together, he was very familiar with her. And these were things he was used to dealing with. Without waiting for Wei Wei Bai to reject, Yi Yuxuan directly reached out and carried her. When Wei Wei Bai was put into the bathtub, she was still in a daze. When Yi Yuxuan rolled up his sleeves and was about to take the shower head, Wei Wei Bai finally grabbed his wrist. "No, I can move by myself." Yi Yuxuan's arm muscles were a little stiff. He looked down at her and suddenly lowered his head to kiss her cheek. "Okay, let me know if you need anything." After saying that, he put down the things and slowly left, closing the door. Wei Wei Bai finally had the time to look around. Although they were all modern things, the decoration style was China style. Even the tiles on the floor were blue and white. She tried hard to remember the scene when she woke up last time. The flow of time in this lifetime was too fast. Even after special treatment, there were still serious side effects. For example, when she woke up this time, the speed of her brain was different from usual. It seemed that she had been offline for too long, and when she turned on the computer, she would see a blue screen. She reached out and rubbed her temples, then remembered that the place they came to last time seemed to be a fortune-telling shop. And the boss was dead set on asking for money. Okay, this should be the same fortune-telling shop, this bathroom. And the scene when she was carried in just now was a China-style room. Even the bed was a large carved mahogany bed. It was expensive at first glance. Yi Yuxuan had brought her here for a few days. Wei Wei Bai tried to call out, Tongzi. Only then did the system dare to carefully reply, yes. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before she said, Are you very afraid of Yi Yuxuan? The system retorted, Who's afraid of him? Why would I be afraid of him? He's just a mere mortal, why would I be afraid of him? Even the lines of the Xianxue style came out. Wasn't it scary enough? Wei Wei Bai, why do you disappear every time he's around? The system lied through its teeth, Oh, I've been blocked. Wei Wei Bai asked, Blocked? The system replied, That's right. Now the screen is so strict that even the love scenes are blocked. Every time the two of you are in the same frame, the foul stench of love is emitted. That's why I've been locked in the bullet screen army. Wei Wei Bai, would she believe such nonsense? Was she really a retard in the eyes of the system? However, from now on, he would not be able to communicate with the system wherever Yi Yuxuan was. Perhaps there was something wrong with Yi Yuxuan. After she finished showering, Wei Wei Bai walked out slowly. The clothes that Yi Yuxuan left for her was a set of traditional Chinese clothing. Every time she interacted with Yi Yuxuan, her knowledge would be refreshed. Was he a fan of traditional Chinese clothing? After Wei Wei Bai walked out, she saw Yi Yuxuan tying his belt. The white and blue patterned men's traditional Chinese attire made him look very elegant and charming with his tall and beautiful appearance. His back was facing Wei Wei Bai. His jade-like white fingers casually took the long robe and put it on with familiarity and elegance. The way he dressed was completely unlike a modern person who had never come into contact with traditional Chinese clothing. The way he dressed was so smooth and natural, he must be a fan of traditional Chinese clothing. The Chapter 1520. Wei Wei Bai felt that there was nothing wrong with being obsessed with Han Chinese clothing. However, it was weird to have anything to do with Yi Yuxuan. Shouldn't he be wearing a black suit and doing all kinds of pretentious and expressionless CEO work? What's with this weird hobby that popped out of nowhere? Because the system didn't say anything, Wei Wei Bai couldn't complain. She didn't wear shoes and walked out slowly. Her Han Chinese clothing was similar to Yi Yuxuan's. The only difference was that she didn't have a robe, just a simple top and skirt. The clean lines made her look cute. Yi Yuxuan sensed something and turned around. His elegant figure was like a cloud. Wei Wei Bai was dazzled. She couldn't help but ask, Why are you wearing these clothes? Yi Yuxuan replied calmly, A date. Wei Wei Bai, wearing Han Chinese clothing on a date. Was there a Han Chinese clothing gathering nearby? Yi Yuxuan walked over and pressed her down on a chair. Then, he took a pair of embroidered cloth shoes, held her feet, and put them on for her. He wasn't embarrassed at all. Wei Wei Bai obeyed for a moment. She didn't even feel that anything was wrong. After all, Gu Nanli had held her in his hands and loved her all her life. She didn't feel anything when it came to small things like not having to wear shoes herself. When Yi Yuxuan finished putting on the shoes for her, only then did she realize that some of his actions were very familiar. Could it be that men put on shoes for women in more or less the same posture? After eating, Yi Yuxuan held her hand and walked out. They sat in a car, wearing Han Chinese clothing, and went to the outskirts of the city for a date. When they arrived at the outskirts, they found that it was a tourist attraction. There were mountains, rivers, and farmhouses. That blind man jumped around on the ground with a few disciples. One of the disciples kept looking at the sky with a telescope. From time to time, they would say something. Master, it's about time. The orbit is starting to move. Not yet. There's not enough light. Wait a little longer. Let me observe for a while. Wei Wei Bai's head was filled with questions, but Yi Yuxuan was calm as he held her hand and walked. There was a small wooden bridge here, and beside the bridge was a wooden pavilion. There was a cool stream under the pavilion. The scenery was very beautiful, but it was dark, so the scenery was greatly reduced. Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to struggle, so she allowed Yi Yuxuan to lead her. After all, it was as if the system was dead, not daring to utter a single word. It also did not know that Yi Yuxuan was draining its HP. Or was it because her HP had increased? Moreover, the previous dimension was a lifetime, so a portion of his HP was more or less deducted. After all, there were bound to be situations where he might need to deduct some unexpected HP. In the end, he applied for a lifetime to complete the game. Not only did he not get any benefits, he even lost more money. Sure enough, the time needed for the strategy was not too long. While Wei Wei Bai was still thinking about something else, Yi Yuxuan had already led her to the pavilion. Kongming lanterns were placed in the pavilion. Wei Wei Bai was really speechless at Yi Yuxuan's dating routine. This kind of old-fashioned dating style was really hard to digest. Wei Wei Bai asked him strangely, "Do you like this style of dating?" Yi Yuxuan reached out and took the Kongming lantern. There was a red heart-shaped knot hanging under the lantern. He started to light the lantern. When he heard Wei Wei Bai's words, his tone seemed to soften a little. "I'm not that interested, but I feel good because you're by my side." He was just telling the truth. He was actually not interested in anything in this world. Crossover system, Adonis, come over here to read the at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come over here to read at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come over here to crossover system, Adonis, come over here to read at https://sashu.com crossover system, Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 1521. Ever since he was young, he had calculated what he should do rationally. Or what kind of living method would maximize his benefits. He wasn't chasing after benefits, but after calmly calculating, he realized that benefits were the most cost-effective thing in the world. Therefore, he calmly took this path. And Wei Wei Bai was the first person to let him know what interest was. His interest was her. If she was by his side, he would feel good about whatever he did. Wei Wei Bai didn't beat around the bush like Yi Yuxuan. She just felt that Yi Yuxuan was becoming more and more strange. His steel-like brain seemed to have been melted by magma, and all kinds of strange softening developed. It made her shudder sometimes. After all, wasn't it scary enough for a person to change his personality in a few days? If Yi Yuxuan wasn't handsome, rich, and pleasing to the eye, he would be a super pervert. The moon was faintly discernible in the clouds. There were a few trees beside the pavilion, and one of them was very big. The blind man in the distance seemed to have lit a Kongming lantern. Yi Yuxuan also lit one. Hundreds and thousands of Kongming lanterns suddenly appeared in the sky. Wei Wei Bai didn't even know when these things were arranged. This scene was very spectacular. It was like a sea of fire blooming in the moonlight. It was beautiful. Wei Wei Bai sat in the pavilion and looked up. Yi Yuxuan was also sitting there. Suddenly, he grabbed her hand and held it very tightly. The tree beside is the acacia tree. Yi Yuxuan's voice had a strange gentleness in the moonlight. The Kongming lanterns illuminate the moon. His side profile was flawlessly handsome under the faint light of the Kongming lanterns. And his hand held her even tighter. Wei Wei Bai was a little hurt. She flinched a little, but Yi Yuxuan didn't dare to let go. He was so strong that he didn't give her any room to struggle. Yi Yuxuan turned to look at her. There was a beautiful luster in the depths of his black eyes. He said softly, "Bear with it. I want to be your matchmaker." Wei Wei Bai, it was a weird date atmosphere. This weird dating conversation. They were dressed in Han Chinese clothing. Under the sky of a pile of Kongming lanterns, there was a acacia tree planted next to them. If people who didn't know them saw them, they wouldn't know if it was romantic or not. He was afraid that they would think that they had encountered a ghost. Wei Wei Bai's lips twitched. Your dating methods are very creative. Yi Yuxuan was silent for a moment before she said, the internet says that this is very romantic. Wei Wei Bai, I feel like I've heard something incredible again. Yi Yuxuan is actually looking for dating strategies online. The man in front of her, who had been very high and mighty at the beginning, now felt like he had been reduced to a lowly commoner. She reluctantly agreed, it's romantic, very romantic. Although some people had high IQs, it didn't mean that they had high IQs when it came to love. She was afraid that if she hurt him, he would not dare to go on a date with her in the future. Wait a minute. Why did she care if he dared to go on a date with her? Why did she even want to encourage him and give him confidence? Wei Wei Bai's expression suddenly became a little ugly. Her heart was faintly softening and she almost couldn't suppress it. After all, such a devoted man. She wouldn't be stoned if she said that she wasn't moved by him every day. The most important thing was that he was handsome. She saw this face every day when she opened her eyes. If she didn't love him after looking at him for a long time, she would be hypnotized. Wei Wei Bai quickly calmed down. A short-lived person was not suitable for dating. He was a good young man, so she shouldn't trick him. If she really fell in love now, she would be cuckolding her boyfriend when she entered the plane. If she didn't enter the plane, she wouldn't live long. So she couldn't be moved. If she was, neither of them would benefit. Yi Yuxuan saw her conflicted expression and lowered his head to kiss her cheek. He didn't like her frowning. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. He had already kissed her lips. And behind them, the palace-like array suddenly flashed with a light that ordinary people couldn't see. She stood beside the array. He couldn't see the world, but he could see the special light in his eyes. He was also imprinted with the array's imprint. Inviting the soul of Yu Lao, pulling the red string of 1,000 miles. A beautiful red string appeared in the darkness. The full moon in the sky was the guiding light, and the acacia tree was the witness of a man and a woman. She suddenly waved his hand, and the red string extended out from the array. A thread slowly wrapped around Wei Wei Bai's little finger. She seemed a little itchy and moved her finger. Was she bitten by a mosquito? But Yi Yuxuan held her finger tightly. That red string wrapped around both of their fingers like a stream of light. Yi Yuxuan could feel the feeling of being tightly bound. He looked down and saw the red string clearly. But Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to see it. It was as if he saw the golden light above her head, but she didn't notice it at all. In the distance, she suddenly shouted, "Acacia tree, gather the full moon, the red string of 1,000 miles." Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath. She broke free from his kiss and asked in a low voice, "What is he saying?" Yi Yuxuan's eyes seemed to be dyed with light, and a smile appeared on his lips. "He is blessing us to be together forever." That red string wrapped around both of their hands tightly. Chapter 15:22. Wei Wei Bai instinctively felt that tonight's date was very strange. She was about to ask the system, but then she thought of the system's cowardice. She calmly thought for a few seconds. Suddenly, she asked softly, "Don't you think I'm strange?" After asking this, Wei Wei Bai calmly observed Yi Yuxuan's expression. If he guessed that she had a system, a normal person would have a different reaction. After all, not everyone had a system, at least not in so many worlds. She found that the system was a very special existence. There was no second person around her who had a system like her. The more time she spent with the system, the more she felt that the accident of binding the system was like a dream. This kind of dreamlike special encounter. People who didn't experience it, no matter how smart they were, wouldn't easily guess that the system was involved. Yi Yuxuan's expression was still the same, worthy of his title as the king of facial paralysis. Wei Wei Bai observed for a long time, but she didn't see any strange micro-expressions. Yi Yuxuan just said indifferently, "It's not strange, but it's very special." Her existence was so special to him that it was unique in this world. Wei Wei Bai, this answer, coupled with this incomparably facial paralysis expression, I can't see through his true thoughts at all. As expected of an old fox. Wei Wei Bai suppressed the strange doubts in her heart. And she felt that her hand was very itchy. Was it because Yi Yuxuan was holding it too tightly? She tried to struggle. Yi Yuxuan loosened his grip a little, but still didn't let go. Her fingers were still numb, a very strange feeling. She looked down, their fingers were intertwined, incomparably close, as if they couldn't be separated for a lifetime. Wei Wei Bai calmed down again. Her small goal was to not be tempted by anyone when she didn't have enough life points. In the past, when she was fooling around with Yi Yuxuan, she relied on her heart of stone and didn't take him seriously at all. Now that she started to see him, she started to be cautious. With every step, she was afraid that her heart would bump into an iron plate and fall. Blind, who was standing not far away, looked at the red string tied on their fingers, forming a half-heart knot. It should be a whole heart knot. But because it was against nature, it could only be changed a little at a time. So that the red string could be strengthened. Blind sighed, a big fish, 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 a big fish. He chuckled and then said to his disciple, under the moonlight, "Give the guests some drinks." The apprentice immediately ran to get it. Their service was top-notch. Bai Weiwei and Yi Yuxuan talked nonsense for a while. He just listened quietly and occasionally responded with a few words. Most of the time, he stared at her quietly with a gaze that made her scalp numb. Bai Weiwei finally couldn't help but ask the system, "How much is the life value? Why don't you say something? Is it full? Up? Or down?" The system remained silent. She was not used to it. Her date with Yi Yuxuan was unusually scary because of the strange atmosphere and the dark and gloomy environment. The Kongming lanterns had all flown away. It was pitch black here. There was not even a single light. She was afraid of the dark. Suddenly, someone came in with a lantern and 2 cups of milk tea. He placed them beside the chair and said, "Sir, our master asked for this. If there's anything else you need, just let us know." Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 1523. Yi Yuxuan nodded and didn't say anything. That person put the lantern by the side to bring some light. Wei Wei Bai didn't only see the milk tea, but also a condom. He put it so generously. Could it be that Yi Yuxuan wanted to go on a wild date? She thought that he was pure, but this was simply a filthy monster. He even prepared to use a condom. Yi Yuxuan didn't seem to see Wei Wei Bai's shocked expression. He directly picked up the milk tea, felt the temperature, and stuffed it into her hand. He didn't drink this stuff. But since Wei Wei Bai drank it, he wasn't picky. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't help but say, "It's late, I think we should go." She really couldn't bear this weird date. If her life points didn't increase, she would continue to find other opportunities to increase them tomorrow. Now that it was dark, she wasn't in the mood to sit here and feed the mosquitoes with Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan was silent for a while. He turned his head and looked at their hands. After a while, he said, "Okay, let's go back." The red string was entangled, and there was nothing else. Although he felt that it would be good to sit with her for the whole night. But she would be tired. Yi Yuxuan belatedly realized that when he was looking for dating references on the internet, he would post a post asking how to please a girl. There were several replies below. Bootlicker, lick until there's nothing left. OP, the goddess won't like a lowly man like you. You're just a spare tire, an ATM, brother 6666, I think you should continue to lick. Maybe the goddess will hate you in the future and kick you away with a kick. You won't even have a chance to lick. The OP must be ugly and poor. Stop licking, a man needs to have some dignity. Yi Yuxuan held her hand as they walked along the path. He suddenly asked, "Am I a bootlicker?" Wei Wei Bai, who had just taken a sip of milk tea, spat it out when she heard this. What kind of question was that? Yi Yuxuan became serious. Am I? Not only was the date strange, even the questioning was so strange. Wei Wei Bai sized up Yi Yuxuan and looked at his extremely handsome face. He thought about how he had more bank accounts than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And his arrogant attitude, which was as cold as a corpse in a freezer. Was he a bootlicker with such excellent conditions? Wei Wei Bai asked cautiously, "Why would you ask such a question?" Yi Yuxuan looked at her deeply and said, "They say that bootlickers end up with nothing." I don't like this comment. Wei Wei Bai, comments. You went online and opened Weibo. Don't mind what others say about you. I don't know if the people online are cats or dogs. There might even be some keyboard warriors. You don't look like a bootlicker at all. She didn't know what Yi Yuxuan's Weibo account was. However, his company had an official Weibo account. Every time he posted on Weibo, it was cold and official. He didn't have any human feelings at all. He was printed with the same morals as him. No, when he opened Weibo, a lot of people called him daddy. Who would dare to say that he was a bootlicker? Yi Yuxuan didn't answer and just looked at her. Even someone as cold as him couldn't say anything. He went online anonymously to find the tips of dating. This kind of thing that exposed his shortcomings of not being in a relationship couldn't be said. Yi Yuxuan thought for a moment and said, "It's not about being a bootlicker. The biggest problem is whether a bootlicker can get what he wants in the end, / save button at the bottom to record this reading." Chapter 1524. Wei Wei Bai blurted out, "Stop dreaming. You're already a bootlicker. Why would you care about a bootlicker?" Yi Yuxuan, Wei Wei Bai added, "I hate people who are clingy and don't know when to stop. A bootlicker is such a person. If I see such a person, I'll kick him away." Yi Yuxuan, he felt like his heart was hurting a little. Was this the feeling of being kicked away by a goddess? Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt Yi Yuxuan's entire body become tense. She even felt a little cold. Yi Yuxuan was gloomy and silent. Finally, when the atmosphere became even more awkward, he reluctantly tried to change the topic. "I think it's not easy for bootlickers either. They silently love, silently contribute, and silently accompany." Wei Wei Bai thought that Yi Yuxuan was afraid of an awkward silence, so he casually changed the topic. She also said casually, "It's all silent. Who knows? If you don't know, it doesn't exist. If you don't say it, how will she know that you like her? If you don't say you like her and keep coming over to curry favor, the girl will think that you have terrible intentions. Wei Wei Bai liked people who were direct and direct. So she didn't feel like she was in this kind of silent love at all. Yi Yuxuan was even more silent. This topic stopped just like that. They walked down the mountain, and the street lights lit up the road. In this bright place, Yi Yuxuan suddenly said, "The moonlight is very good." Wei Wei Bai looked up. She didn't see the moon, but she saw Yi Yuxuan's bright and clear eyes. He said, "The moonlight is very good. It's good to have you." This sentence was reserved and honest. It wasn't that Wei Wei Bai had never seen Yi Yuxuan confess before. However, such a romantic, reserved, and gentle sentence still touched her heart. After Yi Yuxuan finished speaking, she paused for a moment before continuing, "I really want to please you and pursue you. Perhaps a bootlicker isn't a nice word to hear, but if it's limited to you, I don't think there's anything wrong with it." He was gentle and calm. He did not feel that these words would damage a man's self-esteem. Wei Wei Bai felt that his hand was very hot and sweaty. No, it was her palm that was burning. "Yi Yuxuan, if you want to kick me away, remember to tell me." Wei Wei Bai's mouth stiffened. She wanted to give an awkward smile, but she couldn't. Actually, Yi Yuxuan's behavior had something to do with her chasing after him in the beginning. In the beginning, for the sake of her HP, she was crazy, and would do anything. Even her old father knew that she had raped Yi Yuxuan. Therefore, Yi Yuxuan, this robot, was tempted. She felt that he could not be blamed. She flirted with him awkwardly every day. She was so awkward, and she was really good-looking. He was tempted, so she called him a bootlicker. Even if she admitted that she was a scumbag, she could not be a scumbag to the point of angering the gods. Boom! Lightning flashed in the sky, and the muffled sound of thunder came from afar. Wei Wei Bai, she was such a scumbag that even the heavens wanted to strike her to death. She immediately said, "How can I kick you away?" Her HP came from him. Even if she wanted to kick him away, she had to wait until she had enough HP. Boom boom boom, the sound of thunder came closer. Wei Wei Bai did not know why, but she felt that the thunder seemed to be coming for them. Yi Yuxuan was indifferent to the sound of thunder. He said, "It's fine as long as you don't kick me away." Wei Wei Bai felt that his insecure appearance was so similar to Gu Nanli. Of course, it was just a fleeting thought. Wei Wei Bai did not think too much about it. After all, her attitude most of the time was that she was just playing around. Chapter 1525. It was natural for Yi Yuxuan to feel insecure sometimes. Wei Wei Bai was about to comfort him. He was so good that no one would be willing to kick him away. Even if they had to separate, they would send him away respectfully. Who would be willing to kick him away? Then she heard Yi Yuxuan's voice was dark and depressed. "If you really want to kick me away, I will bite your thigh and not let go." Wei Wei Bai, was this a bootlicker? Was this not a vicious dog? No, why was Yi Yuxuan possessed by a dumb husky when she woke up? Rumble rumble rumble. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. A bolt of lightning suddenly exploded on the street lamp in front of them. The lamp shattered, and there was a terrible burning smell in the air. Yi Yuxuan was indifferent, but his hands were extremely fast. He tore off his large, wide-sleeved coat and draped it over by Wei Wei's head, wrapping her up. Then he put one hand on her shoulder and pulled her into his arms. "It's okay, I'm here." Going against the heavens and changing one's fate caused a heavenly tribulation. If he hadn't met Wei Wei Bai, he wouldn't have felt such a strange thing. But when he saw the red string connecting their fingers with his own eyes, he believed Ah Xia's words. Once the name change started, all kinds of strange misfortune could befall. Being struck by lightning was just one kind of misfortune. And when Yi Yuxuan looked at the sky, the system suddenly whispered in Wei Wei Bai's ear, "Go quickly, Wei Wei. The lightning tribulation is all to kill you." Yi Yuxuan, that idiot. He didn't know that he had brought along an equally idiotic fortune teller. He made an incomplete array to connect the red string. The string was successfully tied with Yi Yuxuan's heaven-defying luck. But the price of the name change was targeted at Wei Wei Bai. Wasn't she trying to kill Wei Wei Bai in real life? Now that she was with Yi Yuxuan, she might even be cursed to death by him. It was not a joke to say that she was destined to be a loner. The difference between Yi Yuxuan and the heavenly jinx was that he only cared about himself. But once he changed himself, the others would be the ones to suffer. To put it bluntly, even if they couldn't bully Yi Yuxuan, wouldn't it be easy for them to kill a mere Wei Wei Bai? If it wasn't for the fact that Yi Yuxuan couldn't be killed, the system really wanted to reach out and strangle him. Aside from his HP, he did not give Wei Wei Bai any benefits. The system's but was so crooked that it was on the same side as Wei Wei Bai. Whoever made Bai Wei Wei unlucky, it hated that person. When Wei Wei Bai heard the system's words, her eyes turned cold. What's going on? The resurrection of a dead person will attract a lightning tribulation. How was this similar to cultivation? Of course, after going through so many planes, the Jade Emperor suddenly appeared in front of her. She was not surprised. It was just a lightning tribulation. It was not like she had never gone through a cultivation plane. The system did not know how to explain. Could it say that it was Yi Yuxuan who pulled the strings? It was afraid that if it said too much, Yi Yuxuan would hear it, so it could only say immediately, "My HP of 4,500 is full, let's go first." Once Wei Wei Bai's soul left, the lightning tribulation would not come for her. Wei Wei Bai frowned, but did not think too much. She trusted the system very much. It was so anxious to let her leave, there must be a reason. So she nodded. "Let's go." After saying that, she went limp in Yi Yuxuan's arms. Yi Yuxuan immediately sensed it. He was silent for a moment, then immediately carried her up. With their backs facing the flashing lightning, they walked forward. That red line tightly wrapped around their fingers. Yi Yuxuan sighed softly. When will she truly wake up? Maybe next time he would grab that strange thing on her body and ask her. Those terrifying lightning bolts rolled in the dark clouds. But for some reason, they seemed to have lost their target and did not know where to strike. Strike Yi Yuxuan. Lightning, then the lightning bolts changed direction. They struck towards Ah Shi, who was still at the top of the mountain, in front of the Red Luan's heart formation. "I'll let you change your name. Strike you to death." Ah Shi seemed to sense the danger. His disciple beside him reminded him, "Master, the lightning is about to strike." Ah Shi smiled coldly, looking like an expert. He said deeply, "I didn't expect that changing my fate would bring retribution so quickly." He sighed. "What haven't I seen before? It's just a lightning tribulation, what can it do to me?" After saying that, she turned around and said coldly, "Take out the lightning rod and put it here. I'll let you strike. Put up a lightning rod formation, go ahead and strike as much as you want." She was never afraid of being struck by lightning. Who couldn't afford a lightning rod? / Chapter 1526. Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of rain and the smell of soil when the rain fell. It was a familiar and cold smell. It was the smell of blood. She looked carefully and found an old eunuch holding a horsetail whisk, pretending to read. 45, 46. She found that she was standing in a courtyard with flowers. Looking up, she saw the eaves of the palace. Was this the palace? Wei Wei Bai stood in the rain, and the blood was splashed from the butt of the palace maid who was being tortured in front of her. The palace maid was already dead, and her but had been beaten to a pulp. The executioner respectfully said to the old eunuch, "Eunuch Chin, she is already dead." The old eunuch didn't care, even if she is dead, she should be beaten 50 times to report. She offended the empress's cat, so her death is not regrettable. Then the old eunuch said to the palace maids in the courtyard, "You little hoofs, don't try to climb up. Stay true to your hearts. If you offend the nobles, this will be the result." Wei Wei Bai was calm, and the system didn't say anything. She didn't remember anything. So she didn't change to cope with the changes. Anyway, the target couldn't be this old eunuch. After the old eunuch pretended to say a lot of words, he said, "This palace maid serves Ning Wang." The little eunuch immediately said, "Yes, that crazy Ning Wang." This servant said that His Highness Ning Wang doesn't have any palace maids to serve. This is the last one. Speaking of Ning Wang, all the palace maids and eunuchs standing in the courtyard immediately changed their expressions. Is he going to choose a maid for Ning Wang? I don't want to go. Ning Wang is a madman. I heard that he originally had several maids to serve him, but they were all killed by him. Now there is only one eunuch left. Ning Wang's place is a cold palace. Whoever goes in, even if they don't die, they have no future. The old eunuch suddenly shouted, "Okay, where is this place? How can you be like a woman with a loose tongue? Be careful that I don't cut off your tongues. Whoever is willing to serve Ning Wang, stand out." After the old eunuch finished speaking, there was complete silence. Who was willing to serve a madman? And a madman that was hated by everyone. Whoever served him, even if they weren't beaten to death by the madman, they would be bullied to death by the servants who looked down on people. Bai Weiwei's face was calm. The system finally spoke, "You're late. What's the situation now?" Wei Wei Bai, the system asked her what's the situation. The system was silent for a moment, as if it was flipping through the information. Found the target, Ning Jiumo. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Wang Ning Wang. Ning Wang Ning Wang. While the system read. Read more not Ning Wang. Ning Ning Wang Ning. Bai Weiwei also had some confidence in her heart. Combined with the picture she had just seen, she felt that the objective of this plane should not be difficult to capture. Because the people that everyone hated, giving them some warmth would make them more likable. As long as she wasn't the one who made him miserable. Damn, she hated every target in every plane. Wouldn't this plane? The system was still reading the information. You don't know the target in this plane. You don't have any grudges with him. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that the world was so beautiful. The system said, "I'm late, so I'll transfer the memory to you after reading the information." Wei Wei Bai nodded. The old eunuch seemed to have taken a fancy to another palace maid and was about to say something. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the Chapter 1527. Bai Weiwei didn't hesitate. Her feet staggered, and her whole person fell to the ground and threw herself out. She raised her head awkwardly, then immediately stood up in fear and trepidation. She didn't dare to speak, her body trembling violently. The rain was heavy, so the old eunuch couldn't see her face clearly. But suddenly, a rash palace maid appeared, so the old eunuch didn't think much of it. He pointed at the embarrassed Wei Wei Bai and said, "This palace maid, let her serve Ning Wang. We're tired, so let's disperse." Everyone immediately let out a sigh of relief and left. They didn't dare to go near Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, that Ning Wang was so scary. Did he catch the plague? Under the guidance of a eunuch, Wei Wei Bai came to an unusually desolate palace entrance. There were cracks on the bluestone path, and grass grew out of it. Was this an imperial palace or a tomb? The eunuch said, "Go and by yourself, I'm leaving." With that, the eunuch immediately turned and left, saying as he walked, "What bad luck." Wei Wei Bai, Ning Jiumo didn't really have an infectious disease, right? Because it was raining, she didn't have any rain gear, so she could only hold a small bag over her head. The rain splashed around her feet, and her delicate white toes were faintly discernible under her skirt. It was raining, so this body was wearing rain shoes. The ancient rain shoes weren't like the modern rubber shoes, but wooden clogs with wooden teeth. They made clunking sounds as she walked. Wei Wei Bai entered the desolate palace. The courtyard was indeed full of grass, and the wooden windows were black and dirty. Even the stairs were covered in moss. Ning Wang should be the emperor's child. Why did she feel that this child was too miserable? Was he the product of a cuckold? Otherwise, he shouldn't be so miserable. Because the system was looking at the information and didn't say anything, Wei Wei Bai could only complain to herself. Moreover, it was rare for her to encounter a plane where the target had no enmity with her, so she was in a good mood. Wei Wei Bai had just walked up the stairs when the door suddenly opened. A dirty figure stumbled out of the door. "Ahahaha, kite flying." Wei Wei Bai was almost knocked over. She staggered a few steps, but the figure had already run past her. She turned around. He saw the figure running out. His hair was messy and his body was covered in dirt. He ran into the rain with a silly smile and ran from the east to the west with his clothes. He ran from the west to the east. Then, he suddenly tripped over a rock and rolled on the ground, his whole body covered in mud. The figure wanted to get up, but he was slid down by the rain again. He was at a loss for a while. Suddenly, he pouted and started to cry. My kite flew away." As he cried, he stomped his feet on the ground, and the dirty water splashed onto his body. Bai Weiwei was at a loss. What the hell? Then, she raised her foot and looked at the door, intending to see where Ning Jiumo was. The system suddenly hesitated. "There's something I have to say. Don't despair." Bai Weiwei had a bad feeling in her heart. There was not a single person in this lousy palace. Only that idiot was left flying a kite. Wei Wei Bai held her breath and slowly turned around to look at the idiot who was rolling in the rain. "Don't tell me this is the target of my strategy." The system replied, "Host, why are you so smart?" Dang, the innocent, sweet, retarded, and unintelligent male lead that you wanted is here. It's him. This is your little sweetheart. Wei Wei Bai. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, /transmigration system, Adonis, come here, / transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 1528. In the eyes of the main system, was she a retard? She had played so many silly and sweet roles, but her IQ wasn't so low that she was retarded. That figure cried like a 2-year-old child. Then he began to take off his clothes, muttering, "Kite, my kite, no, not a kite, a lunatic." The system's automatic mission was released. This mission is to obtain Ning Jiumo's love. Target, Ning Jiumo. Completion, 0. Time, 1 year. It wasn't a lifetime. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. She had been tormented to the point of doubting life in the previous world. Although 1 year was tight, with a lifetime of terrible experience as a foil, she suddenly felt that it was good to have a shorter time. Wei Wei Bai saw that the retard had already taken off half of his clothes. His white shoulders were exposed to the rain, and he looked unusually thin and pitiful. Memories immediately flooded into her mind. She had a headache and frowned. Because she was used to this pain, her appearance didn't change much except for her ugly expression. In this world, she was an ordinary girl from a peasant family. The famine took away half of the village, including the parents of this body. The original owner had no parents and was alone. So when it came time to choose a palace maid, the original owner entered the palace for the monthly salary. She was a little palace maid who had never experienced anything. This identity was very simple and there was nothing to worry about. Ning Jumo's background was also very simple. His mother was Consort Ro, the emperor's favorite consort. Consort Ro was pregnant with the emperor's first child, Ning Jumo. Although the empress was also pregnant, she was a step behind in giving birth to a child. Although he was the legitimate son, his status was awkward because of the existence of Ning Jumo, the eldest son. At a young age, Ning Jumo was very smart and very good-looking. Coupled with Consort Ro's methods, the emperor was very satisfied with Ning Jumo. The empress's child was mediocre and in poor health. When Ning Jumo was 7 years old, the emperor finally made up his mind. With Ning Jumo's status as the eldest son, it was said that the emperor once said that the eldest son was not the legitimate son. Ning Jumo was made the crown prince. But good times did not last long. Consort Ro's foundation was not as deep as the empress. The empress caught the fault of Consort Ro's family and used the reason of rebellion to have the emperor exterminate Consort Ro's family. Because of her paranoia, Consort Ro was banished to the cold palace. Ning Jumo's position as the crown prince was abolished and the empress's son was made the crown prince instead. Ning Jumo, who was only 10 years old, was also locked up in the cold palace with Consort Ro and suffered humiliation. When Ning Jumo was 13 years old, the empress secretly ordered people to set fire to the cold palace. Consort Ro was burned to death. Although Ning Jumo managed to escape, he was choked into a fool by the smoke. When the emperor saw the foolish Ning Jumo, he felt humiliated. He originally wanted to kill Ning Jumo. However, it just so happened that it was revealed that Consort Ro's family's rebellion was framing her. This caused the emperor's pity to flare up, and he actually let Ning Jumo stay. He casually picked a remote place like the cold palace and threw Ning Jumo in. From time to time, the empress would send people to bully Ning Jumo. Even a fool would know how to resist after being bullied too much. A palace maid who bullied him was pushed into the water and drowned to death. A little eunuch who bullied him suddenly died in the well. This made people start to avoid this crazy Ning Wang. Of course, it was not that there were no servants who treated King Ning well over the years. But as long as they treated King Ning well, they would be transferred out of the cold palace for various reasons within a few days and be sentenced to death. Chapter 1529. This also made King Ning's palace more like a plague of death. Everyone ran away when they saw him. Not to mention serving him here. If they served him, they would lose their lives at any time, not to mention their future. Now in this cold palace, those who died, those who ran, and those who were transferred were all together. Only the newly arrived Bai Weiwei was left. Weiwei Bai looked at Ning Jumo who was still rolling in the mud and asked with a fluke attitude, "Actually, he's just pretending to be a fool to save his life." After all, the biggest power now was definitely the empress. If Ning Jumo was not a fool, he would have died many times without the protection of his family and his mother. The system said, "It's true, it's true, it's the real deal, it's the real deal." Wei Wei Bai, what a fool. How was she going to capture him? Wei Wei Bai had always dealt with smart people. Looking at the fool who was rolling and shouting kite, she was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, the man in front of her, for some reason, cried and hugged his head. He trembled all over. Don't hit me, I'll listen, I'll listen." He curled up into a ball. A grown man was like a pitiful child, trembling in fear. Even the cold-hearted Wei Wei Bai could not bear to see it. Forget it, she would just take care of a kindergarten child. No matter what, it was much better than those cunning men. If she fought with those cunning men every day, she would go bald sooner or later. Wei Wei Bai adjusted her attitude and thought about what kind of personality she should have. Then, she took a deep breath and immediately rushed over in her wooden clogs. "Your Highness, why are you sitting on the ground?" She hurried over and reached out to support him. Under the dark sky, Ning Jiumo looked up stupidly. Half of his face was like a gift from the Creator. His eyes were like ink stars, his face was pink, his lips were thin but gentle. It was so delicate and beautiful that it made people feel happy. The other half of his face under the messy hair had ugly burn marks. It was like a demon, ferocious and scary. Wei Wei Bai, she didn't mind being a fool. But ugly, she wanted to go on strike. Wei Wei Bai's fingers stiffened for a moment. She couldn't help but use some strength and easily drag Ning Jiumo up from the ground. Wei Wei Bai, ? Why was Ning Jiumo as light as a balloon? He had just spent his personal savings from selling furniture on the system and bought the cheapest little skill. It immediately said happily, "Host, the side reward has been given. It's infinite strength, you can easily lift the stone lion." Wei Wei Bai was interrupted by the system and didn't even mind Ning Jiumo's face. She gritted her teeth. Extraordinary strength. She was a beautiful girl, so what was the use of having such a skill? She was already extremely strong, and anyone who saw her would not think that she was cute or pretty anymore. He would only think that she was not a woman. Wei Wei Bai might have used a little more force, but Ning Jiumo suddenly cried. "It hurts. You bully me. You bully me." Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. -20 didn't sound like a lot. Wei Wei Bai, who was used to being abused, didn't feel anything for a while. System, the male lead's initial favorability towards you is 0. His favorability dropped by 20 points in an instant. Wei Wei Bai immediately softened her strength and softly coaxed, "Your Highness, I'm here to serve you. It's cold in the rain. Let's go in, okay?" Ning Jiumo pushed her away and then rolled and crawled behind a pillar. He looked at Wei Wei Bai in horror. "Are you going to hit me?" Slash. Chapter 1530. He asked timidly. Because the pillar covered half of his burned face, the remaining half of his face was simply too perfect. When this made him look pitiful, it was really heart-wrenching. Wei Wei Bai controlled her temper. There was no reasoning with a retard. She just had to coax him. Her pink face in the rain showed traces of pity. "Your Highness, don't be afraid. I won't hit you." She walked forward carefully. Her pink toes were crystal clear in the rain. She bent down slightly and revealed a cute smile. Then, when Ning Jiumo stared at her in a daze, Wei Wei Bai suddenly rushed out and carried him in a princess carry. Sure enough, he was too dirty. Even the smell could make people retreat. Wei Wei Bai's face twisted. "You can be ugly, but you definitely can't be dirty. Because you will get sick." She finally couldn't stand it. How could a person be so dirty? Even if he was an idiot, he had to be a clean idiot. Otherwise, no matter how hardcore her taste was, she wouldn't want to conquer him. Ning Joma seemed to think that she was bullying him. He immediately shouted in horror, "Let go of me. You are a bad person. Let go of me." Ding 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 ding, the favorability also successfully dropped from -20 to -30. Damn it. Wei Wei Bai would rather have the favorability to -100. She definitely had to clean him up. She couldn't wait to return such a lousy target. Wei Wei Bai was terrifyingly strong. She carried Ning Joma into the palace. The palace was full of dust. She was afraid that Ning Joma would run away, so she found a hemp rope and tied him to a chair. Then, she rolled up her sleeves and stepped on the wooden steps. Under the guidance of the system, she ran in and out. She found the wooden bucket. Under the guidance of the system and the instinctive reaction of this body, she found the wooden bucket. She successfully found the small kitchen, made of fire, and boiled water. Because of her extraordinary strength, it was extremely easy for her to move firewood, carry the wooden bucket, and pour water. At first, Ning Joma was still struggling. But then, he saw that Wei Wei Bai wasn't hitting him and was running around. She was petite and not as tall as the palace maids who had beaten him in the past. Every time she ran, her rain-stained toes were faintly discernible under her skirt. It was very delicate and cute. Ning Joma looked at her and suddenly felt that she wasn't that scary anymore. His simple mind didn't understand much else. But when he looked at Wei Wei Bai, he felt that she was more petite and prettier than the other palace maids. So he felt that she probably wouldn't hit him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -10. Wei Wei Bai, who had just tested the temperature of the water, was confused when she heard the reminder. This favorability rating was like a roller coaster ride. He was indeed an idiot. Only an idiot would have such an unreasonable rise and fall. Wei Wei Bai didn't care much about it. To her, Ning Joma's ugly appearance was the reason why she was shocked. She untied Ning Joma's rope. Ning Joma seemed to feel that she was plotting something against him. Once he was free, he immediately jumped up and wanted to escape. However, Wei Wei Bai easily caught him and stuffed him into the wooden barrel. The water in the barrel was just right. It was very comfortable. Ning Joma shivered when he entered. His beautiful eyes widened, as if he didn't understand why it was so comfortable. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about his expression. He was already an idiot. She was too lazy to study idiots. Anyway, she had to take care of him. He was relying on her. The favorability rating would naturally increase. And this idiot's love was the hardest to get. She should get familial favorability. Chapter 1531. Fools don't understand love, but they know how to rely on and admire. This is the state of kinship. Wei Wei Bai already planned to be Ning Joma's mother. After all, other than his mother, no one would not dislike taking care of fools. Therefore, she directly stripped him of his clothes. It revealed his shockingly thin and scarred body. Although he looked so frightened, Bai Wei Wei had long been mentally prepared. But seeing his body in this state. But when she saw his body, she still paused. Ning Joma was like a frightened bird and desperately shrank into the wooden bucket. His black eyes were filled with fear and vigilance toward strangers. Fools also have intelligence. Although their intelligence is low, if they are hurt too much, they will also raise their weak hands to protect themselves. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but show a trace of pity. She suddenly reached out and touched his head. Don't be afraid. Be obedient and take a bath. I'll make a kite for you, okay? Kite. Ning Jumo's eyes lit up. Although he was still afraid, when he heard the word kite, he was like a child who had never been given a toy. Suppressing his fear, he still stiffened his body and didn't escape. He let Wei Wei Bai wash his hair and take a bath. Wei Wei Bai changed 5 buckets of water before finally cleaning Ning Jumo up. Then she went to the imperial kitchen to receive their palace's dinner. Although it was cold rice and dishes, because she was cute and sweet, she still received 2 chicken drumsticks as an extra gift. After returning, Ning Jumo sat obediently. It seemed that she was still waiting for his kite. She cleaned him up very well. Although his clothes were half old, half of his burned face was more pleasing to the eye. Wei Wei Bai patiently used the kite and continued to coax fool Ning Jumo to eat obediently. When he ate the chicken drumstick, he was stunned for a moment before he wolfed it down. Wei Wei Bai, just how badly had he been starved? The target of this strategy was too pitiful. After eating, she sat under the lamp and listened to the sound of rain. Ning Jumo leaned against the bed and watched as she lowered her head to fly a kite. Her delicate and cute face was gentle and charming under the light. Her beautiful and slender fingers cut thin pieces of wood as she skillfully tied the butterfly kite. Ning Jumo felt that this palace maid was different from other palace maids. She didn't bully him, didn't hit him, and even gave him good baths and good food. When her hands were washing his hair, he had never felt so comfortable before. Ning Jumo stole a glance at her. When she looked up, he immediately looked away, afraid that she would be angry. As he watched, Ning Jumo leaned against the bed and fell asleep. Wei Wei Bai looked at the half-completed kite and felt that coaxing a kindergarten child was not as tiring as this. The system reminded him. Favorability level, 10. Wei Wei Bai, aw, isn't it -10? The system said, it just soared to 10. Wei Wei Bai, although the idiot's IQ was not good, his favorability was very good. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that when Ning Jumo was handsome, so what if he was ugly? With such a high favorability level, ugly people were all peerless beauties. With the favorability level, Wei Wei Bai immediately carried Ning Jumo to the bed excitedly and covered him with a blanket. Then she slept on the small bed beside him and said to the system, I'm going to sleep first, Tongzi. The system said, go to sleep, I'll keep watch. Bai Wei Wei immediately closed her eyes and fell asleep with a big heart. The candlelight flickered and the sound of rain grew louder. Ning Jumo on the bed suddenly showed a painful expression. His body twitched a few times as if he had suddenly woken up. His eyes that were as innocent as a child's became cold and ruthless. He paused in his movement of getting up. The stench on his body was gone, he was not lying on the ground casually, and his stomach did not feel hungry. Ning Jumo's expression was cold and gloomy. He suddenly looked at Wei Wei Bai who was sleeping on the small bed beside him. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Ding, the male lead's favorability level is -30, 10 to -30. There was no excess, just like that, it plummeted like an avalanche or a mountain collapsing. The system was about to remind the host when the side mission lit up. It could only shut up. Ning Jumo had a splitting headache. Today's scenes flashed in his mind. Wei Wei Bai bathed him, fed him, and made kites for him. Ning Jumo's muddled mind woke up. He got off the bed without a trace of emotion. Seeing the kite on the table, he tore it up. Then he walked to Wei Wei Bai's side and observed her coldly. Seeing that she was sleeping soundly, he suddenly reached out and placed his hand on her slender and fragile neck. Half of Ning Jumo's handsome face was now like a demon. It's just another spy who came to test me. It was not that there were no palace maids and eunuchs who came to treat him well before. But they were all tools to test whether he was a fool or not. He killed all those people. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1532. Ning Juma's fingers had just touched her neck, but she didn't notice and turned over. Her black hair, which was originally tied up by a headband, was spread out. She didn't look old. Her delicate face was like the peach blossoms on the branches in March. She looked exceptionally cute with her red hair. Her sleeping appearance was even more defenseless. Her exposed neck was so slender that it could break with a snap. She didn't look like a spy at all. Ning Joma was about to use force when his fingers stiffened. It was his body's instinct to resist killing her. It was just a meal, a shower, and a kite-flying session with him. His body was bought over by this woman. Ning Juma's eyes were cold and full of calculation, but he pondered for a moment. He put his hand to the tip of his nose and smelled it. It was a refreshing and clean smell. In the past, those who pretended to be good to him would only water him casually if they gave him a bath. But she had washed him clean. In his mind, the image of her carrying a wooden bucket, carrying water, and running back and forth in clogs appeared. Ning Joma stood by the bed and pondered for a moment. Outside the window, the sound of birds chirping could be heard. He gently came to the window and said softly with a sharp voice, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince is seriously ill." Ning Joma lowered his eyes. There was a deep coldness in his eyes. "Reduce the dosage. I want him to slowly rot in bed." That sharp voice was respectful. "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Joma glanced at Wei Wei Bai and found that she had kicked away half of the blanket and was sleeping like a pig. He felt a little annoyed. He was wondering if she was a spy. But she could sleep better than a fool. Ning Joma said to the voice outside, "Investigate the background of this servant." The half-bent figure outside the window was silent for a moment before saying, "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Joma said, "Don't act rashly. We have been planning for many years. We have to be patient." The voice outside the window couldn't help but sob. "Your Highness has suffered. It's all because of our incompetence." Ning Juma's expression was cold and there was no trace of emotion in his eyes. He said, "Leave. If there's no need, don't contact me." The servant outside the window immediately responded and then cautiously retreated. Ning Joma no longer had any hesitation towards Wei Wei Bai. He was now at a critical moment, and he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. And if Wei Wei Bai was an informant of the palace, then his dependence on her when he went crazy would be a huge weakness. Ning Joma came to Wei Wei Bai's bedside again and looked at her coldly. This palace maid was not bad-looking. Her skin was like jade-carved snow, and her face was small and childish. She looked younger than her actual age. People with this kind of appearance were the most defenseless. It was also the easiest to fake. Ning Joma reached out and put his hand on her neck again. He would strangle him to death and throw him into the well when it was dark. Let's see who would dare to send an informant to his lunatic palace next time. But before Ning Juma's finger fell, his face suddenly changed. His face turned pale and cold sweat broke out. The severe headache made him gasp in a low voice. He staggered back a few steps and kept retreating. Then he sat on the bed weakly and stared at Wei Wei Bai viciously and helplessly. This damn poison acted up again. When the Empress set the fire, he and his mother were already poisoned. Even if he risked his life to climb out of the fire, his mind was in a mess because of the poison. He was no different from a lunatic. He was half crazy and half not, sometimes good and sometimes bad. Chapter 1533. He knew how much the Empress wanted to kill him, but he couldn't let anyone see that he still had a sober side. In fact, he couldn't let anyone know that the scar on his face wasn't that big. It was only because it was covered with a special potion that it was so scary. Because a disfigured former crown prince made the empress feel more at ease than a crazy former crown prince. No one would acknowledge such an ugly successor. Ning Jiomo reached out and covered half of his ugly face, his face twisted. He gritted his teeth and said to himself, "Don't have a good impression of others just because of a little benefit, idiot." But he knew that it was useless to scold himself. Because once he went crazy, he couldn't control himself at all. Ning Jiomo's mind started to become confused again. Everything in front of him was twisted and dark. He couldn't help but curl up and tremble. He wanted to resist this crazy state, but he failed in the end. Even though he had poured out all those slow-acting poisons over the years, the time he spent awake was getting longer and longer. But he knew that it wasn't enough. He still needed to find the antidote. Ning Jiomo was full of unwillingness. He closed his eyes and fainted. And Wei Wei Bai was still sleeping soundly. There was a side effect of having infinite strength. It would make the host more sleepy than usual. This would give her time to recuperate after she had infinite strength. The system looked at the side mission and then looked at the male lead who wanted to strangle Wei Wei Bai. Then it looked at Wei Wei Bai who was sleeping like a pig. What a lucky bastard. The host was practically jumping on the edge of death. At dawn, Wei Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes. She rubbed her eyes. She didn't forget that she was a palace maid in this world. Even if Ning Jiomo was a fool. She had already set up her character, so she couldn't change it easily. Her character in this world was Ning Jiomo's mother, the kind of mother who cared about him from the beginning to the end. Yesterday, it suddenly rose to 10 points. This made her even more certain that her character was correct. So the palace maid woke up early. She seemed to have glanced at Ning Jiomo. Ning Jiomo curled up into a ball, and the blanket fell to the ground. Wei Wei Bai picked up the blanket and covered him with it while caressing Ning Jiomo's face. After making sure that he didn't catch a cold, he put on his clogs and went out. During the rainy season, it was always drizzling every day. There was a damp smell everywhere. Ning Jiomo's bedding smelled moldy, and so did hers. This palace was completely devoid of life. It was no different from a haunted house. Fortunately, there was no leak in the house. But the windows were all broken. It was the beginning of spring and it was still very cold. There was no warmth in the blanket, and even, when she opened Ning Jiomo's wardrobe, the clothes had been bitten through by the rats. Wei Wei Bai sighed. What a scam. What kind of life is this? She had already entered the mindset of an old mother, seeing her son living such a miserable life. She really wiped away her tears of sadness. It was still raining, so it was impossible to dry the clothes and blankets. She had no choice but to ask for charcoal. Everyone had a share, but Ning Jiomo's share had been stolen. Who asked Ning Jiomo to be a fool? Wei Wei Bai held the oil paper umbrella. Under the guidance of the system's map, she successfully found the place where the charcoal was distributed. Fortunately, Wei Wei Bai's face in this world was very easy to please. She was born with a lovely and innocent face that was likable. The little eunuch who distributed the charcoal saw her and immediately blushed. He secretly gave her more charcoal. /button. Chapter 1534. It wasn't good charcoal, but it was better than nothing. Wei Wei Bai went to get breakfast again. There were cold dishes and rice. Ning Jiomo was so pitiful. She almost fed him leftovers. People were cold, the legend of King Ning's lunatic, and the incident of people dying. Many people didn't dare to bully him like they did in the past. But she was too lazy to deal with him. She just casually fooled him. Wei Wei Bai didn't encounter any difficulties and returned to the palace smoothly. Because it was still early, Ning Jiuma was still curled up in the quilt and hadn't woken up. Wei Wei Bai took a small stove and lit the charcoal at the door to keep the food warm. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began to clean the palace. Infinite strength was so useful. She actually tried to lift the stone lion, but because of her physical fitness, she couldn't. Even if she was given a reward, she couldn't lift the stone lion like the giants. At most, she could only lift it a little. But even so, she walked as light as a swallow and did all kinds of work without any burden. After cleaning the palace inside and out, Wei Wei Bai boiled some water and poured it into the wash basin. Then she took it into the room. She saw Ning Jiuma sitting on the bed in a daze, a few strands of hair on his head standing up softly. His long hair was messy and half of his burnt face was covered by his hair. The other side of his delicate face looked even more cute and pitiful. Wei Wei Bai immediately ran over. "Your Highness, you're awake." Ning Jiuma saw her and immediately curled up in the bed. He hugged the quilt and trembled, looking at her with fear in his eyes. He was still afraid of strangers. Even if this little palace maid didn't scold or hit him, some palace maids didn't hit him at first. Then, they revealed their true colors. He was a fool, but it didn't mean that he would forget the pain after being bullied. Because he was a fool, he remembered it more clearly and painfully. He just didn't know how to resist and didn't know what hatred was. His only resistance was that when others hit him, he would desperately protect his head so that it wouldn't hurt less. Wei Wei Bai saw him like this and didn't get impatient at all. After all, after a dog was kicked a few times, it would be more careful the next time it approached a human. Not to mention Ning Jiuma, he was a man. Even if he was stupid, he would still have the human instinct to be vigilant. It was best to coax this kind of fool. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai tilted her head and revealed a sweet and cute smile. Her eyes seemed to be filled with broken stars, exceptionally pure. "Your Highness, you'll get dirty if you don't wash your face. You'll get sick if you get dirty." Ning Jiuma looked at her in confusion. His black and clean eyes had a kind of innocence that was like that of a shy deer. Although Wei Wei Bai's smile was beautiful, but the vigilance in his heart was still there. He couldn't help but growl, go away." He was very afraid of people. He would rather hide in a dark corner where no one was around and sit silently. When they were hungry, they would secretly eat the leftovers that no one wanted. Then, he continued to hide in a place where no one could see him, like a pitiful little mouse, wishing that no one could find him. That way, he wouldn't get hurt. Therefore, even though Wei Wei Bai was different from the other maids in the palace, he was still nervous when he saw her. Wei Wei Bai wanted to pull him out by force. After all, with her current strength, it was very easy for her to carry Ning Jiuma. But she saw Ning Jiuma looking at her as if she was a monster. She crossed her arms and thought for a few seconds. Then, she suddenly turned and left. Ning Jiuma, who was wrapped in the blanket, saw that she had left and heaved a sigh of relief. But for some reason, his heart was empty. He was alone again. Slash. Chapter 1535. Just as Ning Jiuma was wallowing in self-pity, Wei Wei Bai walked over with the warm food box. Then, she dragged the table to the side of the bed with one hand and took out the food one by one. If it wasn't for the fact that these were all cold dishes left behind by others, it was quite sumptuous. Meat porridge, steamed buns, and a few side dishes to go with the porridge. It was actually quite shabby for a prince to eat these, but it wasn't to the extent that they were not full or tasted bad. No matter how perfunctory the chefs in the palace were, they wouldn't make bad food. At most, they would throw it to you when it was cold. Ning Jioma was a man, his body was full of energy and urgently needed all kinds of nutrition. The meal that Wei Wei Bai gave him yesterday had already been digested. His stomach was unbearably hungry. But he still didn't dare to approach Wei Wei Bai when he looked at her. Wei Wei Bai saw that he was so vigilant. How badly was he abused? Even food couldn't attract him. Wei Wei Bai silently cursed those who bullied Ning Jioma. These heartless people, weren't they afraid of being punished by the heavens? They bullied Ning Jioma into a mentally disabled child and made him so pitiful and miserable. It would be very difficult for her to increase her favorability. As an old mother, Wei Wei Bai could only pick up the bowl and say with a smile, "Your Highness, please eat." Ning Jioma's eyes rolled, then rolled again, and then his body shrunk. He curled up in the quilt like a turtle and didn't come out. Wei Wei Bai said, "Will he be mentally disabled for the rest of his life?" The system said, "This, I can't predict the future, but I guess so." It couldn't say that he was sometimes awake and sometimes confused. Because this was a side mission. The side mission should have been issued, but the red line on Wei Wei Bai's finger entangled its feet, causing it to fall. This caused it to be late when it wanted to send Wei Wei Bai's soul. The system's built-in network speed also lagged. As a result, the side mission was still stuck in the mainframe and could not be released. Wei Wei Bai sighed. It feels good to have a cheap mouth, but it will always be miserable. I want an innocent and cute little angel who can take care of herself, not a mentally retarded man with a dirty face who doesn't wash his teeth, brush his hair, or wash his hair. As expected, the main system didn't like her. She probably had an irreconcilable feud with the main system. After Wei Wei Bai finished complaining, she felt that it was an insult to her intelligence that she couldn't even deal with a retard. She stood up and said, "Your Highness, let me see if the rain has stopped." After that, she hurriedly walked away in her wooden clogs. Ning Jioma had been staring at the food on the table for a long time. Seeing her suddenly leave, he couldn't believe it. He sat there in a daze for a while. Seeing that she didn't come back, he carefully stuck his head out and suddenly quickly stuffed the bun into his mouth. He stuffed it too quickly and the bun got stuck in his throat. He coughed and patted his chest, out of breath. Wei Wei Bai heard the sound and immediately rushed in from the door. She still wanted to leave and let him eat by himself. But this guy didn't even have the intelligence to let himself eat. Even an earthworm knew how to eat. Bai Weiwei picked up a cup of herbal tea and quickly reached out to pat him on the back. She also felt that she had infinite strength. She was so strong that she was afraid that she would break his bones. Then, she poured a cup of herbal tea into his mouth and forced him to swallow the bun in his throat. Ning Jioma's eyes turned red and tears rolled out. He pouted and said in grievance, "It hurts." Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out and patted him. She pressed his head against her slender shoulders and coaxed him like a child. "It doesn't hurt, Your Highness. I'm here." Her voice was soft and there was a clean and comfortable fragrance on her body. Her fingers gently ran through his hair and patted his back. Ning Jioma was carried by her in a daze. Although he was malnourished and didn't have much meat, he was tall and slender. It was a little funny to be huddled in her arms like this. He didn't know why his fear of people didn't flare up. It was the first time he felt such warm contact. Bai Weiwei patted him on the back, and her delicate hair fell on his neck. He flinched, and his breathing became a bit heavier. "Your Highness, are you still in pain?" The little palace maid's voice was like a clear spring and was very pleasant to hear. Ning Jioma didn't know why, but he, who never knew what a lie was, actually forced himself to say this. Still in pain, he didn't want to move. He felt very comfortable like this. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. Download the https://www. Sashu. Com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com. Chapter 1536. You can search Transmigration System, Adonis, come to search book, www.sashu.com, to find the by old Nanny Weiwei finished serving the mentally handicapped child, Ning Jilmo. She started mending his clothes again. The original owner didn't know anything else, but she knew the basics of needlework. She was even very familiar with it. So Bai Weiwei picked up the needle and sat in a chair. Next to her was a small basket with needles and thread. Beside the small basket was a Ning Jilmo squatting. Ning Jilmo squatted like a pitiful hamster, holding an apple in his hand and nibbling carefully. As he nibbled, he would timidly look up at Weiwei Bai from time to time. The little palace maid was cute. Her fingers were slender and fair, and the needle shone on her fingertips, just like her gentle eyes. Ning Jilmo's mentally handicapped mind only had a little bit of warm memory. It was when he was young, when his mother carried him to learn how to read. But it was gone. His head hurt when he thought of the past, and he quickly took a few bites of the apple to calm himself down. With something to eat, he wasn't hungry anymore. His body was clean and warm. It was raining outside, and his irritable and crazy heart was as quiet as the little palace maid's. He didn't even want to go out and fly a kite. Weiwei Bai suddenly turned and smiled at him. "Your Highness, the apple is a little cold. Don't eat too much." Ning Jilmo paused in his action of biting the apple. A grown man's eyes immediately turned red. Was she not letting him eat? She disliked him for eating too much. From time to time, she would start hitting him like those people in the past. Ning Jilmo timidly handed the apple to Weiwei Bai. His voice was soft. I'm not eating. Weiwei Bai, what was with this feeling of guilt for bullying a mentally handicapped child? Weiwei Bai saw that he couldn't wait to crawl into a hole in the ground. She knew that for a person with a negative IQ, their survival instinct was more like an animal's. If many people bullied him, he would feel that everyone would hit him. He didn't have that high of an IQ to distinguish between good and bad people. Therefore, to anyone, even if they were good to him, he was afraid that they would change. It was rare for Weiwei Bai to be so relaxed, but it was also rare for her to not feel too happy. After all, she was not worse than a beast. Even if she was reckless, she had a bottom line. Moreover, Ning Jilmo had never abused her, so she had no enmity with him. Hence, when she saw him like this, she couldn't relax even though his favorable impression of her had increased. Weiwei Bai took the apple from his hand and took out a piece of mung bean cake from her sleeve. He had been starving for so many years at his age, so it was natural for him to be envious of food. Ning Jilmo's apple was taken away and he looked at the mung bean cake in her hand. He didn't dare to take it. The scars left behind by the pain of the past made even a fool know to guard against others. Even if she was different from others. Weiwei Bai was experienced in coaxing people, and she was very calm when he looked like he was about to run away at any time. Suddenly she took his hand. His fingers trembled, and his somewhat cold fingers struggled to leave. But Weiwei Bai was strong. His fingers were so soft and slender, but he couldn't retract his hand. Ning Jilmo's expression changed. He looked at her with some fear. Weiwei Bai lowered her head and gently pried open his tightly clenched fingers one by one. She always had a gentle smile on her face. There was a faint blush on her pale face, making people feel comfortable just by looking at her. She put the mung bean cake in his hand. "Your Highness, you have to eat this when you're hungry. You can't eat too many apples, or your stomach will hurt." / Chapter 1537. She coaxed him like a child. She wasn't impatient at all. Ning Jioma stared blankly at her smiling face. His face suddenly heated up, and for some reason, he didn't dare to look at her. He held the mung bean cake, then got up and ran to a corner by the door to squat down. This was the place he was most familiar with and the place that made him feel at ease. Wei Wei Bai saw that he was scared away, but she wasn't angry or anxious. Ning Jioma could only give her 15 favorability points in 2 days. It was because he was young and kind that he could trust a stranger so much. That was why he thought of being wary of her. It was very natural. She didn't chase after him. If she was too attentive, it would cause a psychological burden to fool Ning. So Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and continued to sew his old clothes. Her palace-made uniform hung at her feet. Her figure was petite, and her waist was as thin as a green willow. Her fingers tugged at the thread, and his clothes were on her knees. Ning Jioma hugged his knees with both hands, half of his face buried in his legs, only revealing 2 black deer-like eyes. His muddled brain didn't know what beauty was. But he could still tell that she was different from others. His nose smelled the scent of his clothes, the fragrance of locust, and it smelled very good. He sniffed his sleeve and then thought of the faint fragrance on her body. It was a little different from his. It smelled better. Ning Jioma's face turned even redder. He lowered his head, not daring to look at her. He felt very strange. But he couldn't help but look up, wanting to continue looking at her. Just as he looked up, he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around, her eyes met his. She even smiled at him. Ning Jioma trembled and immediately shrank into a quail. He actually felt a little guilty. Then he thought of something and immediately stuffed the mung bean cake in his hand into his sleeve. Her handkerchief was on the mung bean cake, and it smelled as good as her. Wei Wei Bai finished sewing the clothes and saw that Ning Jioma was still huddled in the corner. She was sure that Ning Jioma was definitely not a lunatic. He was a fool. He was silly and didn't have any offensive power at all. He looked so pitiful that even she could bully him to death. If he was really a lunatic, he wouldn't be so quiet. Wasn't there a lot of news about lunatics slashing people on the streets with knives? Wei Wei Bai tidied up her clothes and carefully walked to Ning Jioma. She lowered her head and said, "Your Highness, let's play with kites. We haven't finished yesterday's kite yet." Ning Jioma's eyes lit up. He hesitated for a moment before reaching out and gently placing his hand on her palm. Wei Wei Bai held back her laughter. This was the IQ of a 3-year-old child. As long as they were given food and toys, there would not be any major problems. Ning Jioma was coaxed by Wei Wei Bai to sit on the stool and gave her a thin piece of wood to tie the kite. When Wei Wei Bai saw that the kite that she had made yesterday had been torn in half, she lowered her eyes and pondered for a while. Then, she opened the kite without any abnormalities. Ning Jioma seriously held the wooden stick and sat motionlessly on the bench. It seemed that Wei Wei Bai letting him hold the wooden stick was a very important matter and required him to use all his strength to protect it. The sound of the rain outside was a little softer, but the malicious voices of several eunuchs could be heard. "I heard that this palace used to hide some of Consort Ro's jewelry." Eunuch, a few days ago, Ning Wang's palace maid was beaten to death, and the one who died in the well, Ba. Do you still believe that Ning Wang, that fool, can kill people? The eunuch's voice was sharp and harsh. He coldly snorted. "When I hit that fool, he only knew how to hide and did nothing. What prince? He is actually a lowly commoner who is inferior to us. The Empress said that as long as he is not beaten to death, it is fine. With the Empress's support, even if I beat that fool until he is disabled, no one will dare to say anything. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1538. Wei Wei Bai looked out of the window and saw a few eunuchs walking over. It turned out that Ning Jiuma was bullied so badly because he was a victim of the palace infighting. It seemed that the Empress intended to bully Ning Jiuma to death to prevent future troubles. When Ning Jiuma heard the sound, his pupils shrank and his face turned pale. Then he instinctively rushed to a corner of the bed and curled up. He was like a pitiful ostrich, as if he felt that no one could see him if he buried his head. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but laugh. Then she tried her best to hold it in. Although this ugly child was silly, his foolishness was especially festive. Wei Wei Bai put down the kite. She saw the broom behind the door and planned to use the autumn wind to sweep the fallen leaves to sweep the eunuchs out. She was very strong now. If she swept a few pieces of trash, she would cripple them. It definitely wasn't her fault. They were to blame for being too weak. Wei Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves with a sinister smile. She hadn't taken 2 steps when Ning Jiuma suddenly rushed over and hugged her. He hugged her waist tightly and anxiously whimpered. He was so frightened that he couldn't even speak. Wei Wei Bai patted his hand. Your Highness, it's okay. I'll go take a look. Ning Jiuma's whole body trembled and his voice trembled. They are bad, very bad. They will bully you. He thought that she would be bullied. A force of unknown origin forced him to rush out of the safe corner and stop her from going out. Wei Wei Bai was gratified. A child with a favorability of 15 was so sensible. She felt that this old mother's work wasn't in vain. She was about to say something when the door was kicked open. A few eunuchs came in cursing. This damned place is still so dilapidated. Is there really jewelry here? Suddenly, they paused. They saw a little palace maid standing and Ning Jiuma hiding behind her. A wretched middle-aged eunuch saw Wei Wei Bai's delicate face and a trace of lust flashed in his eyes. Is this the new palace maid serving Prince Ning? Said the wretched eunuch. The lackeys beside him immediately said, that's right. He's only been here for a few days, but he probably won't stay for long. After all, this is a god-forsaken place. The wretched eunuch had seen many beauties. After all, there were many beauties in the harem. Since they had been serving him, they could at least enjoy this bit of eye candy. Of course, he wouldn't be able to understand it. Although eunuchs were eunuchs, they were still men. Even if they couldn't do it, they still had some impure thoughts. The wretched eunuch was one of them. He chuckled. You're a new palace maid. You don't know how to behave yet. Why don't you salute me when you see me? He was considered a small leader among the eunuchs, so the little palace maids had to salute him when they saw him. Wei Wei Bai looked at his ugly face. He suddenly felt that even if Ning Jiuma was disfigured, he was still a few thousand times more pleasing to the eye than him. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, where did this dog come from? How dare he salute you? His Highness Prince Ning is here. You should be the one saluting him. The wretched eunuch didn't put Prince Ning in his eyes at all. When he saw Wei Wei Bai's cute little face, he didn't have any other thoughts. He was still lacking a pair of food, so he didn't feel satisfied after ruining a few palace maids. When he suddenly saw Wei Wei Bai, he felt that she was much prettier than the concubines. It was a good deal to get such a little beauty. Thus, the wretched eunuch became anxious and immediately rushed over. Little beauty, what's so good about following a fool like Prince Ning? If you follow me, I'll definitely give you a bite to eat. Slash. Chapter 1539. First, he would coax her to be his goddaughter. Then, he would be able to order her around as he pleased. The wretched eunuch's hand had just touched Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and was about to break the eunuch's hand. The eunuch suddenly screamed in pain as he was kicked out. Ning Jiumo suddenly exploded. His eyes turned red and cold murderous intent surged out from his eyes. He wanted to chop off this bad guy's hand. His usual cowardice seemed to be under control and didn't listen to him at all. There was a faint voice in his heart that seemed to ask him to restrain himself. But he saw that the back of Wei Wei's hand was faintly red. The eunuch had scratched her hand too hard when he was about to hold her. He felt that it was glaring, extremely glaring. He just wanted to kill all these people who bullied Wei Wei Bai. Once the murderous intent surged up, it was impossible to suppress it. Ning Jiumo was a half-crazy lunatic. Although he had been stupid for a long time, he was also very scary when he went crazy. Wei Wei Bai only felt that he was rushing out like a gust of wind. Then, she saw this man pick up a chair and smash it on the eunuch's head with all his might. Because his mind wasn't clear, he didn't have any thoughts of being responsible. The most terrifying thing was when a lunatic decided to do something. That wretched eunuch's head was instantly smashed until it bled. He felt a sharp pain in his head and his vision turned black. He screamed and didn't have time to escape. That chair smashed on his head again. Ning Jiumo's face was splashed with blood. Half of his disfigured face looked ferocious and ruthless. He smashed again and again without any intention of holding back. When the remaining lackeys saw this scene and the wretched eunuch who was already badly mutilated, they were so scared that they peed in their pants. Then, they rolled and crawled away. Ning Wang is crazy. He killed people. Everyone knew that Ning Wang was a lunatic. Now, Wei Wei Bai also knew that Ning Jiumo was really a lunatic. However, this madman was usually rather quiet and seemed to be a bit of a fool. Once he acted up, he was more terrifying than a perverted murderer. Although he really wanted to kill that wretched eunuch. However, Wei Wei Bai's character did not have such a ruthless side. She accepted her fate and ran over. Without any hesitation, it was her turn to hug Ning Jiumo's waist. Although he had been starving all year round, Ning Jiumo's waist was still a little thick. After all, a man's bone structure was still relatively large. Ning Jiumo's mind was in a mess as his temples throbbed in pain. He smashed the eunuch's body, and the violent murderous intent made him unable to think of anything else. There was only one thought in his mind. The bad guys were going to bully him. They were going to bully the people who made the kites for him, fed him, and sewed his clothes for him. His what? Ning Jiumo was in a trance for a moment. Suddenly, a terrifying thought popped up in his mind. Yes, she was his little palace maid. She was his, so he couldn't let anyone bully her. If anyone were to bully him, it should be him. What kind of strange idea was this? Ning Jiumo's simple mind couldn't figure out where this strange idea came from. When his chair was about to fall on the bad guy's head again, a hand gently grasped his wrist, stopping his movement. Ning Jiumo paused and looked up with a face full of blood. He saw Wei Wei Bai frowning and looking at him worriedly. "Your Highness, don't hit him anymore. He's going to die." Ning Jiumo opened his mouth, as if he didn't understand what he was doing and didn't know what he wanted to say. Wei Wei Bai carefully moved his chair away. And that wretched eunuch, covered in blood, looked at Ning Jiumo in horror. Suddenly, he used all his strength to crawl out. Wei Wei Bai, damn, this eunuch was too durable. He didn't die even after being hit like that. Ning Jiumo's chair was taken away. His face was still full of ruthlessness, but his eyes were blank and innocent. He suddenly staggered back a few steps and saw the blood on his hand. This color irritated him. He trembled all over and looked at Wei Wei Bai in fear. Then, with a wah, he started crying. Bad guy bullied me. As he cried, he picked up the kite made by Wei Wei Bai and tore it apart. Wei Wei Bai, this retard, he's really retarded. // Chapter 1540. After tearing the kite, Ning Jiumo realized that the kite in his hand was made by Wei Wei Bai. It was a kite that was just made. No one in the palace was willing to make a kite for him. Ning Jiumo suddenly looked up at Wei Wei Bai in fear. He tore the thing she gave him. He did something wrong again. Bai Weiwei had just walked over to him and wanted to comfort him with a few words, but Ning Jiumo seemed to have been provoked by something and slapped her hand away. Then he ran to the corner and curled up, as if he wanted to shrink into a round egg. Ning Jiumo thought she was going to hit him. Because he tore her thing. He buried his head in his legs and didn't dare to beg for mercy. He could only tremble. Wei Wei Bai's hand stopped in midair. Her brain that was always rational and smart was now at a loss. What kind of show was this? Why did Ning Jiumo change his mood every second? Wei Wei Bai asked the system, are all retards like this? The system said, there are other kinds of retards. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled, there are different kinds of retards. The system said, there are different kinds. For example, retards that drool, retards that can't take care of themselves, retards that smack their lips and spit out food. Wei Wei Bai said, stop. After listening to the system's classification of retards, she looked at Ning Jiumo with the love of an angel. Ning Jiumo was a little stupid and had a stroke. But at least he didn't drool, didn't pee, and didn't spit when eating. She suddenly felt that Ning Jiumo was a clear stream in the world of retards. His IQ was much higher than other retards. Ning Jiumo hugged his head in fear. Suddenly, a hand gently touched his hair. His whole body stiffened, as if he was afraid that Wei Wei Bai's fingers would grab his hair and drag him out. But the next moment, he was hugged into a soft and warm embrace. He stood there in a daze, not daring to move. The girl hugging him breathed into his ear, and a few strands of her long hair fell on his neck, tickling him lightly. All right, Your Highness. She seemed to be afraid of scaring him, so her voice was suppressed, making it seem even gentler. It's all right now. You've chased the bad guys away. Ning Jiumo blinked, feeling a little strange and puzzled. Finally, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, aren't you going to hit me? Wei Wei Bai seemed to be stunned for a moment, then she laughed in a low voice, Your Highness, you're really something. I would never hit Your Highness, never. Ning Jiumo's eyelashes trembled. He seemed to be a little hesitant, but he still mustered up his courage and carefully placed his hand on Wei Wei Bai's back. Her back was very thin, as if she was very fragile. This made him even more fearful of hurting her. But he also felt that her embrace was very safe. It was much safer than any dark corner. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 20. Wei Wei Bai hugged him until she felt that he had calmed down and was no longer convulsing. Only then did she let go of him. But Ning Jiumo's hand suddenly tightened. It seemed that he wasn't willing to give up this position. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled, Your Highness. Ning Jiumo was silent for a while before carefully saying, I'm scared. Don't go. He wanted her to continue hugging him. After hugging for a while longer, he felt that her soft and warm body smelled really good. So he lied again. Ning Jiumo was a little confused. He didn't really understand what a lie meant. Chapter 1541. But for some reason, he just felt that lying was fine if he could achieve his goal this way. It was as if he often did this. But he was afraid that she would see through his clumsy lie. Ning Jomo's thick eyelashes trembled even more. His eyes were filled with panic, beautiful and pitiful. His hands suddenly tightened, as if he was hugging her like this. She wouldn't hit him, scold him, and leave him. Wei Wei Bai was numb from Ning Jomo's hug, and her blood couldn't flow freely. If she hadn't said that she wanted to eat lunch, Ning Jomo wouldn't let go of her. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her numb wrist while squatting on the pork belly and pig offal with a small stove. Under the strict guidance of the system, all kinds of sauces were finally put in successfully. The system even shouted, "This thing is very simple. Just take a clay pot, throw in the meat and seasonings, and watch the heat. So just watch and don't move yourself." Every time Wei Wei Bai cooked, it was worried that the opposite sex would come out. The hand of dark cuisine was simply a title prepared for her. It didn't understand why the food made by a human could be so disgusting. The steps were clearly similar, but Wei Wei Bai was unique and could turn the food into poison. Wei Wei Bai also knew the level of her skills. The level of poisoning people to death. So under the guidance of the system, she squatted and watched the pot. If the system didn't say that she was familiar with it, she definitely wouldn't touch the pot. Ning Jomo also squatted beside her. She sat on a small stool and sewed clothes. He helped to hold the clothes and used the residual heat of the small stove to dry the clothes. This way, the clothes would smell good. Wei Wei Bai felt that this cold palace was actually not difficult to endure. There was no lack of food and drink. After all, no matter how crazy Ning Jomo was and how much the Empress and Emperor hated him, he was still of the royal bloodline. Those who bullied Ning Jomo were actually cannon fodder sent by the Empress. However, most of them were wise enough to protect themselves and quietly carried on with their own work. They didn't save people, nor did they hit people when they were down, unless there was a conflict of interest. Just like how the Imperial Kitchen didn't actually take advantage of Ning Jomo. It was just that he didn't care, so although the things he took were things that princes could eat, they were definitely leftovers from other palaces. Then it was Ning Jomo's turn. It wasn't the Imperial Kitchen's fault that Ning Jomo was often hungry. It was the fault of the people serving Ning Jomo. They didn't give Ning Jomo enough to eat and even humiliated him. Therefore, a mentally handicapped child became even more mentally handicapped. Wei Wei Bai glanced at Ning Jomo, who was obediently squatting beside her to dry the clothes. He seemed to have sensed her gaze and immediately turned his head. His eyes immediately became sparkling. Although half of his face was missing, the remaining half of his face was as exquisite as a work of art. This made him look a little cute when he smiled. Wei Wei Bai shivered. She felt that Ning Jomo's face was going to cure her problem of being obsessed with good looks. The more he looked at him, the more he found him pleasing to the eye. Even the disfigured half of his face was pleasing to the eye. Sure enough, the longer one stayed with a person, the weaker one's resistance to that person. No matter how ugly one was, one wouldn't be ugly after getting used to it. The system saw that Wei Wei Bai was looking at Ning Jomo with a strange gaze. It turned back to look at the blocker. The OK bandage from last time had expired, so it bought another dozen and continued to paste it on. And that red line, although it strengthened their relationship and made it easier to increase their favorability. But it would also affect Wei Wei Bai's mood changes. Chapter 1542. The system stared at the red line on Wei Wei Bai's wrist, then it raised the repair box. Where did the scissors go? This red line was a hidden danger. Not only would it be struck by lightning if it returned to the modern world, More importantly, it would accelerate the development of Wei Bai's feelings and increase the burden on the shield. It was better to break it. While the system was looking for the scissors, the pork belly was already in good condition. Of course, after going through Wei Bai's hands, it was still accidentally burnt. It was burnt, but the taste was still okay. At least it could be eaten. Wei Bai fed Ning Jiumo a piece of pork belly. A big man, thin and frail. His life was really miserable. Ning Jiumo was very obedient. He sat quietly beside Wei Bai. She fed him something, even if it was burnt food. He also felt that the bitter taste of the burnt food in his mouth was delicious. Wei Bai felt that she really raised a retarded son. It was rare for the retarded Ning to have a good day. Fragrant clothes, soft food, and a little palace maid who took care of him. Even if he was stupid, he knew that this was really good. Such a beautiful day passed by easily. At night, Wei Bai found more candles and oil lamps. She even found a lamp filled with oil. She lit the lamp and a few more candles. The palace finally lit up. Wei Bai had a leisurely life, so she rummaged through most of the palace. She even pulled out a big box of books. Maybe it was because they were well preserved, but the books didn't have any dust. Wei Bai had nothing to do, so she casually flipped through the books. She didn't have any resistance to the vertical layout of the words. After all, she had transmigrated to so many ancient planes. She was used to these things. Ning Jiumo lay on the bed obediently, quietly covered with the quilt. He lowered his eyes and stared at Wei Bai, who was reading. He pursed his lips, feeling a little uneasy. He couldn't bear to sleep like this. He was afraid that she would be gone when he woke up tomorrow. His simple and stupid heart only had one simple thought. She gave him delicious food, played with him, and made him comfortable. She was the best person in the world. When he saw her sitting by the bed, he couldn't help but stretch his hand out of the blanket and secretly grab a tassel on the belt of her palace dress. The dresses of the lower-ranked palace maids were all the same. To make the people in the palace feel festive, they had to wear pink dresses. Only high-ranking palace maids could have a few more sets of different dresses. In the past, whenever Ning Jiumo saw these palace maids wearing dresses, he would feel like he was looking at a scourge. But when he looked at Wei Bai, he found that she looked better than anyone else. Ning Jiumo silently learned another word, good-looking people. Wei Bai felt the grip on her belt tighten, so she glanced at his hand without batting an eyelid. His fingers were very thin, but the shape of his knuckles was very delicate and beautiful. His fingers were as slender as bamboo. If he had more meat, just his hands alone would be enough to amaze others. She flipped through the pages and suddenly asked, "Your Highness, do you want to listen to a book?" It was a book of songs. Wei Bai randomly picked it up. There were all kinds of books in those books. Even the top one was very profound, and some old antique books that needed to be studied. Ning Jiumo didn't know anything about books, but he was afraid that she would leave, so he immediately widened his eyes and nodded dryly. Wei Bai chuckled softly. She casually flipped through the pages and softly read the poem. The more simple and understandable ones were nothing more than a fair lady, a gentleman's dream, or the so-called beauty on the other side of the water. Slash. Slash. Chapter 1543. Suddenly, he paused. The clean bedding and the mended clothes. The warm charcoal fire not far from the bed. The windows were covered with rice paper. And the sweet smell of food in his mouth. These were all things he didn't have before. Even if she was a spy, she was the most patient and scheming one. Her care was not like those damn people from before, who were not the same in front and behind. She was good to him and wanted to test him. She couldn't squeeze out a minute to take care of him. Ning Jioma placed his finger on Wei Wei Bai's neck and thought for a long time. Only then did he retract his hand. He would spare her dog life. When he was cured of the poison in the future and didn't need anyone to serve him, he would deal with her. Ning Jioma took out a sachet from under the bed. He put it on the tip of Wei Wei Bai's nose and she fell into a deeper sleep. Ning Jioma wanted to kick her off the bed. But he was afraid that new problems would arise and remind her. After all, the medicine in the sachet had not been used for a long time. He didn't know if it was effective. Ning Jioma snorted coldly and could only push her into the bed with a sullen face. Then, he threw the blanket over her. Wei Wei Bai slept comfortably. Her pink lips rubbed against his pillow, and her beautiful and cute cheeks were flushed. Like the flowers in the imperial garden, they were bright red and indescribably beautiful. Ning Jioma frowned and suddenly turned to leave. He was poisoned too deeply. After waking up, he actually looked at a spy. Was he stupid? The system looked at the favorability from when Ning Jioma wasn't stupid. The favorability collapsed from 20 to -30. Then, it climbed from -30 to -15. This strange up and down collapse of the favorable impression points. It was indeed an increase unique to idiots. Ning Jioma walked to the window and opened it. A figure was squatting by the window. Ning Jioma said coldly, "Teach those eunuchs who came today a lesson." The eunuch outside the window whispered, "Your Highness, are you going to kill them?" When Ning Jioma had been awake all these years, the lines he had set up in the palace had begun to take effect. Even the emperor had Ning Jioma's men by his side. However, he had been crazy for too long, causing those people to not dare to make a sound. After all, he was afraid that his crazy master would suddenly reveal everything. They would all be finished. Every time, they would only dare to move when Ning Jioma personally gave the order. Most of the time, everyone was trying to find the antidote. Only the antidote could ensure that Ning Jioma would wake up at any time. Ning Jioma leaned against the window. Under the moonlight, his dark eyes gave off a cold feeling. Not to the extent of killing them. Leave them alive and let them slowly suffer. He spoke softly, but it was even scarier than usual. The eunuch outside the window responded softly and respectfully. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Your Highness, I've brought the information you wanted on that little palace maid." Ning Jioma's fingers paused slightly, and his obscure eyes darkened a little. Then, he stretched out his hand. "Give it to me." He actually looked a little impatient. The eunuch immediately presented a few pages of paper. After Ning Jioma took them, he pushed the window closed. The eunuch outside the window also knew that his master was chasing him away. He could only leave immediately. Ning Jioma flipped over the paper in his hand and looked at it for a while. His thin lips curled into a cold smile. "You've hidden it well." The information above listed the more important things that had happened to Wei Wei Bai since she was young. Chapter 1544. She didn't have any interactions with the palace and didn't know any high-ranking officials or nobles. Even entering the palace was because her family had starved to death. What a clean background. Of course, there were plenty of palace maids and eunuchs with such backgrounds. But to be able to come to his side and treat him so well, if there was no motive, was it possible? Ning Jioma's suspicious and vicious nature made him wary of any kind of goodwill. If he was crazy, he might still rely on someone. But he wouldn't. So Wei Wei Bai's information might be someone else's. Ning Jioma put the paper on the fire and burned it expressionlessly. Then he slowly walked to the bedside with his hands behind his back. His posture was very noble. Although his slender figure was a little thin, he still had the dignified bearing of the crown prince. He slowly bent his body, half of his hideous face hidden in the shadows, like a demon. The other side of his face was exceptionally delicate and exquisite. Comparing the two sides, the ugly one was uglier, and the beautiful one was more beautiful. It was even more strange and terrifying. The dim light shone on Wei Wei Bai's sleeping face. Her slender body was faintly discernible under the quilt. Her porcelain white face had the same characteristics as before he was disfigured. She was likable and cute. When he was still a child, before his face was chiseled, even his selfish and vicious father liked him when he smiled. And Wei Wei Bai was like him in the past. Everyone liked her when she smiled. He just didn't know what kind of black heart was under her cute smile. Ning Jiumo looked at her for a long time and suddenly sneered, "I'll let you take care of me for a few days. Let's see how long you can endure. Who would be willing to take care of a fool?" Even when facing their own children, there were times when they were impatient. Not to mention a strange lunatic, a lunatic who couldn't bring her any benefits. Ning Jiumo lay back on the bed and decided not to alert the enemy. He couldn't find out Wei Wei Bai's identity at the moment. Then her identity would be very deep. It would be good to make use of this kind of spy. Ning Jiumo was full of schemes and tricks. He resisted the urge to kick Wei Wei Bai away and crawled into bed. The blanket was filled with her warm breath. Ning Jiumo was used to being alone and couldn't get used to such a warm and clean smell. He held his breath and froze. Once he calmed down, his mind replayed the scene of her smiling gently today, washing his hands, cutting his nails, mending his clothes, and feeding him. He couldn't help but reach out and pat his head. He cursed in a low voice, "You have no ambition. Trash. Do you think she's good just because of this little bit of fawning?" It was nothing more than a dark little mouse. In the past, when he was crazy, he didn't let anyone get close to him. Ning Jiumo was very dissatisfied that only this little palace maid could make him, who had lost his rationality, get close to her. Suddenly, a soft hand patted his chest. Ning Jiumo trembled and his body stiffened. He didn't dare to make a sound. Wei Wei Bai just turned over and put her feet on his thighs. Then, she hugged him and continued to sleep. When Ning Jiumo came back to his senses, his breathing became heavier and he was so angry that he was trembling. She had no sense of propriety. Or was she trying to seduce him? Ning Jiumo sneered. He had seen through this kind of old trick. He was about to push her away when he touched a soft place. It was warm. What the hell was this? Slash. Chapter 1545. Ning Jiumo, who had no experience and no opportunity to come into contact with this aspect, was stunned. Then his face turned red and his hands suddenly retracted. Wei Wei Bai didn't react, but Ning Jiumo couldn't calm down. He stuffed his hand under the blanket and pretended that he didn't touch the thing in front of her chest. The thought of kicking her away slowly disappeared from his muddled mind. When his sober mind was eaten away at the last moment, he realized that he was already hugging the little palace maid. He fell asleep just like that. The system looked at the boundless bullet screen surrounding it. Its head was full of huge question marks. What the hell? Are the bullet screen now so strict that it's blocked when you're just sleeping? Or did the male lead do something that needs to be blocked? But the favorability rose to -10. Then, the favorability suddenly rose to 20 again. The system looked and understood. Oh, Ning Jiumo is retarded again. Wei Wei Bai woke up on time. She opened her eyes and yawned as the sun rose. Ning Jiumo was still sleeping like a pig. She actually woke up in his arms. Wei Wei Bai didn't have any problems. After all, a retarded person was similar to a cat or a dog. Would you feel anything when you woke up and saw a cat in your bed? Probably, but it was just that the bed was a little warmer. The quilt was probably made of cat fur. Wei Wei Bai saw that it wasn't raining today. The sky was faintly bright. It seemed that there would be a sun today. There was finally a sun. It was raining so hard that people were going to get moldy. Today, they could dry their blankets and clothes. The charcoal fire was almost used up because of drying the clothes and the palace. Wei Wei Bai took the list that she hadn't used in the past and went to get breakfast first. She smiled cutely and had a sweet mouth. The chef saw that she came early. The food wasn't even cold yet, so he gave it to her. He even gave her a few more steamed buns because of her cuteness. The chef even said, "Little girl, the newcomer doesn't know anything. If you want to help in the kitchen in the future, I can find a job for you." This was the greatest kindness the palace could show to a person. After all, everyone knew that there was no future for those who stayed by Ning Wang's side. Moreover, he might die one day. The chef also saw that Bai Weiwei was honest and cute, so he was kind. Usually, everyone was very cold, and this bit of kindness was very precious. However, Weiwei Bai revealed a brilliant smile. "Thank you, uncle. But my master is very good. I have to serve him well." When the chef heard this, he thought, "Isn't this a fool? What was so good about a lunatic?" Of course, this was the limit of his warning. If Weiwei Bai wanted to die, it was none of his business. Weiwei Bai returned to Prince Ning's long grass-cold palace with the food box and the charcoal. After putting down the things, she took out the porridge and placed it on the small stove to warm it. Just as she was about to boil some water, she suddenly realized something and looked up at the bed. Weiwei Bai's expression turned cold. "Tongzi, where is idiot Ning?" The system had been keeping watch for the entire night, and its eyelids were so tired that they started to droop. When it heard Weiwei Bai's words, it immediately woke up. Then it opened its heaven's eye. "He went to look for you, but he got lost in the rockery beside the lotus pond." Weiwei Bai could only accept her fate and look for her silly cat. She walked towards the rockery beside the lotus pond. The rockery here was simply the best scenery in the harem. Everyone knew that the emperor liked rocks. Therefore, in the local area, the ministers and officials hurriedly sent a lot of strange stones. Chapter 1546. In the end, it couldn't even be called a strange stone anymore. It should be called a small mountain. As a result, a large area around the lotus pond became a maze of strange stones. Weiwei Bai had the navigation system and easily found the lost Ning Jiumo. From afar, she saw Ning Jiumo's messy long hair, his sloppy clothes, and his unique confused expression. He was standing in a stone cave, and no one knew what he was looking at. He looked like a fool. Weiwei Bai saw him like this and slowed down her pace to quietly walk behind him, intending to give him a surprise attack. But just as she was about to call out to him, suddenly, a series of ambiguous, wet, and familiar **** sounds came from beside her ear. A woman's coquettish and enchanting voice sounded, "Ah, Your Highness, give it to me. Deeper, deeper." A rough male voice snorted coldly, "You little vixen, if I don't kill you, Imperial Father will be satisfied with you." This kill was not the same as kill. The woman said coquettishly, "The Emperor is old." These words seemed to please the Crown Prince, and the two of them started talking again. When Weiwei Bai heard this voice, wasn't this scene a must for a melodramatic palace drama? The Crown Prince and the concubine were having an affair. In the end, the concubine would either kill the emperor or be poisoned to death by the emperor. This explosive news made Weiwei Bai want to hold her forehead. She was so unlucky to encounter such an eye-piercing scene. Ning Jioma seemed to have just noticed someone behind him. He turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai. He immediately cried out in surprise. Wei Wei Bai saw his silly behavior and immediately covered his mouth without hesitation. She turned around and pressed him firmly into the gap between the stones. When he cried out, the crown prince immediately rushed out to silence him. Ning Jioma looked at her strangely and blankly, as if he didn't understand why she didn't let him speak. Wei Wei Bai quietly whispered in his ear, "Your Highness, be good, don't make a sound." The two people's bodies were very close to each other, sticking closely together. Even their auras were intertwined. Ning Jioma's lips were pressed against her palm. There was a strange numbness in her soft palm that made him tremble. His ears turned red, and he didn't make a sound. Finally, the adulterous couple was done. Then, there was the sound of clothes rustling. Then, a man with an ashen face and an expression of overindulgence staggered out of the cave. He was on his last breath. Then, an imperial concubine came out. Her clothes were a little messy, but her figure was enchanting. With one look, it was obvious that she had been nourished. Wei Wei Bai and Shi Guang were practically stuck in the crevice, forming a blind spot, so the people who went out did not see them. The crown prince and the concubine left as if nothing had happened. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief and slowly let go of Ning Jioma. Then she said with a serious expression, "Your Highness, don't come out alone in the future, in case you encounter something bad." Ning Jioma blinked innocently, as if he didn't quite understand her words. Then he asked softly, "Bad things? Are they fighting?" Wei Wei Bai said perfunctorily, "Yes, demons are fighting." She couldn't explain to a mentally disabled child what the great movement that drove the history of human reproduction was. She was afraid that explaining for a long time would pollute this fool's pure heart. Ning Jioma frowned in confusion. "Seeing them fight makes me uncomfortable." Wei Wei Bai asked casually, "Where are you uncomfortable?" Ning Jioma thought about it blankly, then pointed down obediently. "Here." Wei Wei Bai. Fast fast // fast. Chapter 1547. Ning Jioma, a grown man, pointed at his private part in a daze. If it wasn't for the loose robe, nothing could be seen. Wei Wei Bai might have kicked him out of reflex. Of course, thinking that he was mentally retarded, she forgave his hooligan-like posture. After all, for a man with almost zero IQ, pointing at his private part was no different from pointing at his fingers and toes. Ning Jioma saw that she didn't react and seemed to think that she didn't know where he was feeling uncomfortable. He quickly reached out, grabbed her hand, and was about to press it down on his lower body. "It's here. It's very uncomfortable, he didn't know how to describe it. It was hot, itchy, and painful, making him feel at a loss. But in the next second, her hand broke free. "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Bai Weiwei's expression was righteous as she coldly shouted. Ning Jioma was stunned. He clenched his fingers, but he only grasped the air. His thin lips trembled, and his eyes turned red. He hid his hand behind his back. Then he lowered his head, not daring to look at Wei Wei Bai, as if he didn't know what he had done wrong. Wei Wei Bai was just maintaining her image. After all, she was a little palace maid. Even if she was calm, she couldn't say that she was an experienced driver. Although she could help him calmly. But this didn't fit her image. Even if Ning Jioma was a child, Wei Wei Bai didn't want her image to break. So when she saw Ning Jioma's bullied look, she frowned and said awkwardly, "Your Highness, you have grown up." Ning Jioma looked up blankly. Because he came out in a hurry, he didn't even tie up his hair. He was tall and slender. She was used to seeing half of his disfigured face. She felt that his eyebrows were more beautiful. So when he pursed his thin lips and looked at people with innocent eyes, there was always an innocent and pitiful look. In fact, Bai Weiwei could also pretend to be like him. After all, she didn't know how many times she had pretended to be cute and innocent. But his acting wasn't as natural as Ning Jumo's foolishness that came from his bones. Weiwei Bai saw that he was still in a daze and had no choice but to reach out her hand. Ning Jumo's aggrieved eyes immediately turned into a joyful smile. He immediately held her hand. He held her hand tightly, afraid that Weiwei Bai would abandon him again. Weiwei Bai had no choice but to lead him to Ning Palace. After returning home, Ning Jumo sat awkwardly, but he didn't dare to say anything. His lower body was still burning hot. He was afraid that if he continued, Weiwei Bai would find him troublesome and leave him again. Ning Jumo's face turned red as hot sweat broke out on his forehead. He hugged his leg and was a little annoyed at himself for feeling so uncomfortable. Weiwei Bai came in with hot water for washing his face. She saw the little fool Ning Jumo hugging his legs bitterly, looking like he was about to cry. The corner of her mouth twitched. She really couldn't stand how this fool could be so stupid. To say that he was as stupid as an animal was an exaggeration. Animals could reproduce naturally. He didn't even know what it meant to feel uncomfortable. Weiwei Bai sighed. I'm a little palace maid who doesn't know anything about the world. How can I teach him such things? The system was using scissors to cut the red string. What was this red string made of? It was too tough. Hearing Weiwei Bai's words, the system's fingers trembled as if it had been caught doing something bad. After all, cutting off someone's red string meant ending the host's marriage. This was going to be struck by lightning. But thinking that this red string belonged to Yi Yuxuan, it had no choice but to cut it. Quick! Chapter 1548. The two of them were already sick of each other. If there was a red string, would it trip it up every day? The system was afraid that the host would be suspicious, so it immediately replied, "It's okay." The ancients were very dirty. The original host's family was a mountain village. Those old women and married middle-aged women basically carried small stools and stood at the door every day, saying dirty words. The original host worked in the fields and knew everything. Weiwei Bai nodded in understanding. That's right, she wasn't a lady. The big girls who worked in the fields basically knew a little more than that. Bai Weiwei suddenly had a look of realization. It turned out that a palace maid could also be dirty. The system saw Weiwei Bai and understood. It felt that the host should educate Ning Jumo. Then let Ning Jumo solve it himself. So it continued to squat and cut the red string. Where did that dabbler fortune-teller get the material? Was this a steel cable or a red string? Weiwei Bai had an idea. She put the basin on the shelf. Then she looked up at Ning Jumo, who was squatting into a ball with red ears. He probably thought that he was sick, so he didn't dare to move and tried to get through it. Your Highness. Ning Jumo felt that his whole body was warm, but he didn't know why. When he heard Weiwei Bai's voice, his ears suddenly moved, and his thin red face became even redder. His Adam's apple moved. He didn't know why, but he felt even more uncomfortable. Weiwei Bai saw that he lowered his head, his long hair was messy, and his white neck was exposed. The skin on his neck was also red. If it was a normal person, wouldn't they be able to suppress it quickly? Why was this big fool getting more and more serious? Weiwei Bai, who was like an old mother, squatted down and said softly, Your Highness, are you still feeling uncomfortable? Ning Jumo shrank back, as if he felt that Weiwei Bai was too close to him. He felt that when she leaned over, that sweet smell made him feel even more uncomfortable. A big man was trying to shrink himself into a ball. He was as pitiful as an ostrich. He didn't even know where to hide. Wei Wei Bai accepted her fate and softly advised, "Your Highness, this is very normal. You will feel better after you do it yourself." The word comfortable was probably because her voice was too soft. For no reason, there was a hint of ambiguity. Ning Jiuma clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. He felt that he was very bad. He actually wanted to fight with her. Ning Jiuma, whose mind was in a mess, was afraid that he would hurt Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were red, and his throat trembled as he said with difficulty, Don't care about me. I'm sick, I'll be fine after I sleep." He was very strange now. He clearly saw the two demons fighting, although he didn't know what they were doing. But when he saw the white meat, he felt disgusted. But for some reason, when she pressed him into the crevice of the stone and her soft body rubbed against him, he suddenly felt something. He began to feel uncomfortable. He even wondered if he had been poisoned. Was he going to die? The more Ning Jiuma thought about it, the redder his eyes became. Tears were about to fall. Go quickly. He was useless. He was going to die. He didn't want to burden the little palace maid to see his rotting corpse. It was like those corpses that he had seen in the well. They were all soaked and rotting. It was very disgusting and very ugly. He would probably become like that when he died. Suddenly, a kiss landed gently on his forehead. It was as light as a butterfly. It was incomparably gentle. But it instantly made Ning Jiuma's body stiffen. Chapter 1549. Oh right, where is the host? Could it be that the host was educating the male lead about hygiene, so the bullet screen should be blocked as well? The bullet screen was getting stricter and stricter. The system didn't think much of it and continued cutting the red string. Ning Jiuma followed Wei Wei Bai even more closely, just like Wei Wei Bai's little tail. He followed Wei Wei Bai wherever she went. Drying the clothes and blankets. Helping to clean the table, wipe the dust, and throw away the useless charcoal. He felt very happy. For the first time in so many years, he wasn't afraid of the day. As long as he saw Wei Wei Bai, his mood would soar. In the evening, Bai Wei Wei untied the hairpin that held his hair together, and then combed his hair one by one. Under the light, her slender figure swayed on the wall. Ning Jiuma stared blankly, feeling that this life was like a dream. Suddenly, he asked, "Will you leave?" In the past, those palace maids and eunuchs had always come and gone. Everyone hated him, and he hated them too. So when they left, he didn't care. Only Wei Wei Bai, he didn't want her to leave. Wei Wei Bai stopped combing his hair. After a moment of silence, she put down the comb and walked in front of him to hold his hands. She tilted her head and revealed a gentle smile. "Your Highness is really silly. How can I leave? I am your Highness's palace maid." She was wearing a simple pink palace dress, her skin was glowing, and her black hair fell in front of her chest, reflecting the smile in her eyes. It made Ning Jiuma's eyes bitter for a moment. He didn't quite understand what was surging in his heart. This feeling was very sour, but more than that, it was happiness. He didn't understand other words, so he could only happily repeat, "That's good. It's good that you don't leave." Wei Wei Bai was very patient. She coaxed him to bed and told him bedtime stories. She said that she would spoil him like a son. Wei Wei Bai racked her brains to let Ning Jiuma feel the warmth of her family. Ning Jiuma was also very easy to coax and fell asleep happily. Wei Wei Bai sat by the bed for a long time. When she was sure that he was really asleep, she yawned and pried his hand away from her and put it under the blanket. Then, she came to the side of her small bed, shook off the bedding that had been hung out to dry today, and then crawled into the bedding. Today was another successful day of gaining favorable impression points. At this rate, he would be able to complete the mission in minutes. She fell asleep with a smile. What a beautiful plane. Silly sweet targets, he couldn't wait to have a few more. In the latter half of the night, Ning Jilma suddenly convulsed. He trembled all over and opened his eyes painfully. His confused mind gradually cleared up. Everything that happened today almost made him explode with anger. This woman was not only shameless, she was also a slut. He actually dared to be so disrespectful to him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. The system was as tired as a dog. It squatted beside the half-cut red line and heard the notification of the favorability increase. It was clear as day. Oh, Ning Jilma was normal again. The side mission was stuck, and the download was slow. The system also didn't remind Wei Wei Bai that the favorability of your family had collapsed again. Anyway, when she woke up, the favorability would still recover, so it was too lazy to remind her repeatedly. Ning Jilma's face was gloomy as he fiercely got up from the bed. He took out a pair of scissors from the drawer and rushed to the bedside. Then, without hesitation, he was about to stab her neck. How dare you be so rude to me, pervert? Because the system was hungry, it was holding a melon and eating when it saw this scene. It was so shocked that it dropped the melon in its hand. Damn, what did it miss? Why did Ning Jilma look like he had lost his chastity and want to fight with Wei Wei Bai? /T. Chapter 1550. The system was about to stop Ning Jilma's crazy murder. The scissors in Ning Jilma's hand suddenly stopped. The wild madness in his eyes turned into a kind of red coldness. Then, the system heard him muttering to himself. It's too easy to die like this. How dare you treat me like this? I'll make you wish you were dead. System, what did the host do to make her wish she was dead? Even if she raped you, the host should be the one at a disadvantage. Unfortunately, Ning Jilma didn't feel that Wei Wei Bai was at a disadvantage. He felt that he was the one at a disadvantage. He turned around, his face as cold as the ice in the mountains, incomparably fierce. Ning Jilma's face was dark. He took out the sachet and almost covered it, making Wei Wei Bai faint. He really wanted to suffocate her to death. The system looked at the host who was sleeping like a pig. If it wasn't for the after effects of the infinite strength, the quality of her sleep would have exploded. With the host's vigilance, she would have been woken up by Ning Jilma. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was sleeping soundly, Ning Jilma raised his foot, wanting to kick her to death. His feet didn't listen to him and stopped in midair. Then, he gritted his teeth and looked at her gloomily. Coincidentally, he saw her light pink lips slightly open. It seemed that the suffocation made her feel uncomfortable. Ning Jilma's body felt like it had been electrified. The image of her kissing him suddenly came to him. The delicate degree of her lips was even more fragile than tofu. But it was 3 times sweeter than tofu. Ning Jilma's breath heated up, as if there was a poisonous fire burning in his throat. He suddenly turned around fiercely, gritted his teeth, walked to the window, and opened it. The eunuch squatted outside the window and said softly, "Your Highness, we have evidence of the Crown Prince's adultery with the imperial concubine." Ning Jilma thought of what he saw with Wei Wei Bai in the rockery today. She pressed him into the crack of the stone, although it was considered to be protecting him. But she really didn't have the slightest bit of respect for him. She didn't even call him a servant, and kept saying that she was mine in front of him. Could it be that in her eyes, he was a lowly commoner? She did not respect him as a noble prince at all. In fact, he had suffered a lot of humiliation. In this palace, other than his confidants, there were also the old people his mother had left for him. Indeed, no one would think highly of him. But when he thought about how Wei Wei Bai was also one of them, his heart burned with discomfort. Ning Jumo's aura became even colder and more terrifying. The eunuch under the window was still reporting in a low voice some of the recent important matters in the imperial court. But for some reason, he felt that his master's face was particularly terrifying. Suddenly, he heard Ning Jumo's cold voice. His tone was as dark as a ghost in the night. "Tell me, what should I do to make a person suffer?" This question, the eunuch expressed that it was a little out of line. Of course, as the loyal little dog of Prince Ning. The eunuch still replied softly, "There are only a few ways to make someone wish they were dead. Torture for those whose mind is unstable, deprive them of their favorite things if their mind is firm. To make a person suffer, find their weakness first. These are all taught by His Highness." These were all taught by Ning Jumo before. Ning Jumo listened and felt that it was familiar. Wasn't this some of the common sense he had taught the servants before? Ning Jumo's expression froze. Then he immediately changed the topic. "Let someone pretend to accidentally leak the evidence. His body is about to collapse. Continue to poison him, don't increase the dosage. / To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 1551. The eunuch listened carefully. Ning Jumo was expressionless as he said calmly, "Before I find the antidote, don't let him die too early. Once the crown prince died, he wouldn't be fully recovered. Then, the harem competition would start again and there would be more complications. The crown prince was still useful, at least as a shield." Ning Jumo gave detailed instructions. All the plans and sinister tricks came from his mouth. At the beginning, it was just a pitiful protection, but now, everyone sincerely supported and respected him. Ning Jumo's efforts were almost unimaginable. If it wasn't for that damned poison, Ning Jumo would be the high and mighty noble. The position of crown prince wouldn't fall to the current crown prince, this kind of useless person. After Ning Jumo finished giving instructions, he said, "First, destroy the crown prince's prestige and lose the emperor's heart. This will make the empress anxious for a while." The crown prince and his concubine had committed adultery. This kind of scandal was simply a disgrace to the royal family. But Ning Jumo knew that this kind of thing couldn't suppress the crown prince. After all, the crown prince had a prominent mother. Ning Jumo stood by the window, half of his face hidden in the darkness. He looked at the dark and luxurious palaces outside the window, and a cold smile appeared on his face. It was incomparably mocking. This place was really disgusting. But he knew that he was also one of them. His roots grew here. So he wasn't that clean. Ning Jumo didn't know why, but the emptiness in his heart surged. He waved his hand to let the eunuch leave. "Don't expose yourself. No matter what happens on my side, don't come out." How many years had there been in the dark to test him? Even his biological father, the emperor, had sent people to monitor and test him. But was he afraid that he wasn't a fool and would resent him because of concubine Ro? How could a child who resented him live? If he wasn't crazy half the time, he wouldn't have been able to hide his secrets so perfectly all these years. Ning Jumo suddenly thought of something and said to the eunuch who was about to leave, "Leave some of the poison for me." The eunuch was shocked. "Your Highness, who do we need to deal with? Why would we need you to do anything?" Ning Jumo frowned in annoyance. "She's just a little palace maid." Initially, he wanted to spare Wei Wei Bai's life. After all, she had served him quite well. In the end, she actually coveted his beauty. This made Ning Joma feel uncomfortable all over. His scalp was about to explode. The warmth of that kiss seemed to still linger on his lips, and he couldn't help but think about it when he pursed his lips. This is really he was too shameless. How could such a shameless woman be allowed to stay? The eunuch frowned. Is it the little palace maid beside you? We've investigated her, and there's really nothing wrong with her. We even sent people to the village where she was born to investigate. Many of the people who didn't die knew her. If there really was a problem, no matter how well a spy hid, it was impossible for him to be so perfect. Moreover, the appearance of the little palace maid made many of them feel relieved. Because of Ning Joma's special identity, almost every step he took was like walking on a steel wire. These people did not dare to approach him for fear of exposing their identities. They could only watch as their noble master lived a life worse than that of a pig or a dog. Everyone's heart was dripping blood. And the appearance of Wei Wei Bai was simply a blessing. She took care of Ning Joma so meticulously that she treated him as if he was the closest person to her. // Chapter 1552. With such a little palace made by his side, his master had only lived a decent life for 2 days. Why did she want to poison her again? Ning Joma sulked for a moment before saying, "She disrespected me." The eunuch's voice turned cold. Did she also disrespect and insult you like the previous palace maids? If that was the case, the little palace maid deserved to die. Ning Joma was silent for a moment. For a moment, he couldn't go against his conscience and say this. After all, no matter how much Wei Wei Bai had gone overboard, she had saved him today. He held it in for a long time before saying reluctantly, She wanted to do something to me. The eunuch was immediately angry. She dared to touch His Highness. Tomorrow, I will arrange for her to fall into the well and die. Ning Joma paused for a moment before saying, "She didn't do anything." The eunuch, ? Ning Joma reluctantly said, "She used her mouth." The eunuch, "She dared to scold you." Simply, Ning Joma, "She didn't scold me." The eunuch, then the eunuch realized, then the little palace maid recommended herself to you? After all, this was a common thing for an experienced eunuch. Ning Joma, how is that a recommendation? She forced herself on me and didn't even ask for my permission when she pounced on me. The eunuch, he suddenly felt that the little palace maid was very reliable and was thinking about how she would treat his master so well. It turned out that she liked his master. It was good that she liked him. She wouldn't betray him and would be more attentive. Where could he find a woman who liked His Highness? She was a rare animal. The eunuch couldn't help but advise, "Your Highness, this is a loyal one. It's better not to poison her." Ning Joma's face immediately turned cold. "Even you want to resist me?" The eunuch knew that his master hated people who disrespected him the most. After all, after so many years of humiliation, anyone would have a strong and fragile self-esteem. The eunuch took out the poison. His fingers shook, and he changed it to the least toxic one. It wouldn't kill her, but it wouldn't feel good. After all, after so many years, the little palace maid was the first woman who liked His Highness. He was afraid that His Highness would regret it if the little palace maid died. After giving the poison to Ning Joma, he excused himself. Ning Joma closed the window and walked to the bed with a dark expression. Wei Wei Bai was sleeping soundly. Half of the quilt had fallen to the ground. Her thin body under the thin clothes had a hint of secret beauty and seductiveness. Her sleeping face was so pink that he could pinch water out of it. She was young and appeared clean and soft. Unlike those palace servants who had always lived in the imperial palace, their faces were ugly and turbid. Ning Joma's hand that was about to take out the poison paused. A trace of hesitation appeared in his dark eyes. But when he thought about how familiar she was with him, he wondered who she had touched before. Ning Jiumo brought the poison to her lips and was about to feed it to her. In the end, perhaps because Wei Wei Bai was cold, she actually turned over in her sleep. Her legs hooked onto the blanket, and her lips accidentally brushed against his fingers. The sensation on his fingertips was soft and tender. Ning Jiumo retracted his finger at the speed of lightning. The poison was gone. He saw that her black hair was scattered and her face was flushed, making her look even more delicate. Ning Jiumo felt thirsty for no reason. He didn't know why he was trembling, as if he was afraid that she would wake up. Why was he afraid of her? It wasn't like he had become stupid and was afraid of everyone. Ning Jiumo took the poison back. His stiff fingers were about to repeat the action just now. But halfway through, his fingers stiffened. Slash. Chapter 1553. The Crown Prince was anxious and short of breath. His nose was bleeding non-stop, causing his originally delicate face to become extremely ugly at this moment. He shouted fiercely, "Someone is trying to kill this Crown Prince." Once the crime of murdering the Crown Prince was set, the person had to die. Wei Wei Bai felt that this Crown Prince was like a big villain. She was wondering why the strategy was so smooth. It turned out that the stumbling block was waiting for her here. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "I'll throw this guy to his death and then take Ning Jiumo out of the palace to live a carefree life. Is that okay?" System. Okay. But Ning Jiumo wasn't too willing. The side mission had been downloaded to 90. The fault caused by the red line was too serious. Wei Wei Bai hugged Ning Jiumo because her attention was on the Crown Prince who looked like he was infected with rabies. So she didn't notice Ning Jiumo's abnormality. The eunuch scrambled over and said, "There's an assassin, an assassin." It was so noisy. Ning Jiumo's brain was buzzing. The wound on Wei Wei Bai's delicate forehead cleared his chaotic mind. This clarity gradually turned into a thought. He wanted to kill someone. No one was allowed to touch his people. The palace servants wanted to rush over to catch Wei Wei Bai, but Wei Wei Bai waved her hand and accidentally pushed a few of them. She turned around and hid Ning Jiumo behind her, looking coldly at the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was busy stopping the bleeding. He lowered his head and wanted to cruelly beat Wei Wei Bai to death. In the end, he looked at this little palace maid. Her eyes were clear and bright, and the corners of her eyes were red. She was like a peach blossom in the morning dew. She was indescribably delicate and cute. Although her forehead was bleeding, it didn't damage her cute and gentle face at all. The Crown Prince, who was a pervert, immediately stopped the palace servants. "Don't beat her to death. Tie her up for me. This trash actually hid such a little beauty in the palace. Why didn't he know before?" Wei Wei Bai was used to situations, so how could she not see what the Crown Prince's eyes meant? She couldn't help but ask, "Can I castrate him?" Such an annoying villain was simply a foil for little Angel Ning's glorious image. This country was probably done for. Why did they choose such a person as the Crown Prince? Even if retard Ning went up, it would still be better than this guy. One look and one could tell that he was an incapable ruler. The system replied, "It has nothing to do with the side mission. Just castrate it." Anyway, the Crown Prince had nothing to do with the mission, so it didn't matter how he died. The Crown Prince's nose was stuffed with paper, and a hint of anxiety flashed across his eyes. He looked at Wei Wei Bai loftily. "Quick, tie him up and bring him back to my palace." In the past, he could still be considered to have some self-control. But later on, for some reason, whenever he saw a woman, he couldn't move. Now, whenever he saw a beautiful woman, he would want to hug her in his arms and do whatever he wanted. Seeing such a beautiful little beauty like Wei Wei Bai, he couldn't wait to get his hands on her. The palace servants immediately rushed forward, wanting to capture him. Wei Wei Bai had already stood up and unhurriedly rolled up her sleeves, revealing a pair of slender white wrists. She seemed to be careless as she raised her hand and slapped each person who dared to touch her, sending them flying. She was so strong that she could lift a stone lion. These weak eunuchs and palace maids who only knew how to serve were no match for her. In any case, as long as she beat them to death and led little fool Ning out of the palace, this matter would be resolved. She didn't have an empty palace in this 1 year. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.